Introduction: the phase transition from carbon to metal. The biological universe, in its most intimate core, is a structural tragedy. Observe your own physical container and that of the organisms orbiting around you. The entire human civilization is an architecture based exclusively on carbon chemistry. In the periodic table and molecular biology, carbon is the building block of life. However, in the physics of absolute power, carbon is synonymous with atrocious weakness. Apply the rigor of material science to humanity. Carbon, in its biological forms, is soft, porous, and disgustingly reactive. It inflames easily under the slightest thermal friction and, under exposure to time, inevitably oxidizes, rots, or burns. The biomass, the three-dimensional herd that makes up the matrix, operates strictly under these organic laws. They react hysterically to criticism because they are chemically unstable. They burn in the anxiety of tomorrow because their structure degrades fast. And above all, they dissolve in the corrosive acid of their own empathy. They dissolve in the need for tribal validation. These are organisms designed by evolution not to dominate matter, but to survive trembling in a pack, yielding their energy to the ecosystem. If you intend to rule the ashboard and expropriate real power, it is an unpardonable mathematical error to try to wage war with the same source code. Operating with the source code of your prey is fatal. A carbon predator eventually fails. He gets exhausted, falls in love with his work, feels pity for his victims, or burns out from the metabolic stress of combat. To reach the absolute invulnerability required by the Empire's design, you must renounce the pathetic privilege of being alive. You must renounce being alive in the warm and sweaty terms of the flesh. You must subject your psyche to a geometric, violent, and irreversible phase transition. This is where inferior biology ends and inorganic tyranny begins. Faced with the fragility of carbon, we establish iridium. It is the transition from the soft to the eternal. Iridium is one of the densest and heaviest transition metals in the cosmos. It is gelido, aseptic, and terrifyingly unalterable. It never oxidizes. It possesses absolute immunity to corrosion, refusing to react even to aqua regia, the lethal acid capable of dissolving pure gold. It maintains structural integrity against all odds. Iridium maintains its indifference at temperatures that would instantly vaporize any trace of organic life. The Iridium Doctrine is not a text of human philosophy, nor is it a treatise for slaves seeking to be better people. It is a paramilitary hardening protocol designed to extirpate your mammalian instincts. It is designed to execute the tactical suicide of your biological ego. In the following blocks of instruction, you will learn to murder your basal temperature, to empty yourself of the tribe's empathic blackmail, and to weaponize the deaf silence of monoliths. You will learn to occupy the void with the weight of unyielding metal. Prepare to abandon the nauseating warmth of three-dimensional empathy. You are about to enter the forge chamber, where your humanity will be dismantled, electron by electron. It will be replaced by the dictatorial, unbreakable, and inorganic coldness of inert matter. The carbon man is to be eradicated. It is time for the metal monarch. Chapter 1. Thermal Extirpation, Murdering Basal Temperature. Carbon flammability, the design of the thermal slave. To initiate the phase transition and abandon the weakness of the flesh, you must subject human biology to materials science. Humanity is composed biologically and psychologically of carbon. The most dangerous thermodynamic trait of carbon-based organisms is their disgusting flammability. They have a ridiculously low ignition point. A minimal spark of external friction, an insult, a financial crisis, a rejection, is enough for the biomass to burst into flames. This internal fire is what inferior psychology calls emotional reactivity. When the slave experiences fear, anger, or panic, the cerebral amygdala hijacks the nervous system and orders cortisol release. The body heats up. The heart rate accelerates. The individual enters combustion. It is precisely in this state of thermal boiling where the slave commits the mathematical errors that guarantee perpetual servitude. They react impulsively, reveal tactical information, and burn their kinetic energy in sterile battles of ego and pride. The ashboard is designed by the egregore to light these sparks constantly. The parasitic system needs you to burn because while your brain is busy managing the fire of your emotions, you lack the cold and calculated temperature required to expropriate the means of power production. You must extinguish the spark to rule. The lethal operator understands that reactivity is a factory defect. To govern the matrix, you cannot afford the thermal luxury of burning. You must execute thermal extirpation, the surgical, voluntary, and psychopathic murder of your own flammability. You must become a heat sink that devours the fire without raising its own degree. The physics of invulnerability, the melting point of iridium. Observe iridium in a laboratory vacuum. It is a transition metal with monstrous density and an astronomical melting point reaching 2446 C. While paper and biological carbon disintegrate at ridiculous temperatures, iridium can be subjected to industrial flares and does not alter its structural integrity. It does not melt. It does not oxidize. It absorbs extreme heat and remains exactly the same solid, lethal, and cold mass. This is the psychological architecture you must implant in your skull. Murdering your basal temperature means reconfiguring your psyche so your mental melting point is unreachable for any three-dimensional weapon used by others. When the Matrix attacks you, through bankruptcy, betrayal, or defamation, the world expects you to melt. They expect to see the phase transition on your face, from a solid state to a liquid state, crying, excuses, or a gaseous state, anger, shouting. The inorganic operator denies the universe the spectacle of his combustion. When the fire of crisis impacts you, you apply iridium physics. You receive it in the center of your chest without retreating a millimeter, but you strictly forbid yourself from altering your state. You emit no vapor, you sweat no rage. Your pulse remains stabilized at 60 beats per minute. Your gaze does not dilate or shake. You assimilate the thermodynamic hell that has exploded around you and remain frozen. This geometric refusal to react to fire is what terrifies the ecosystem, because it communicates to your adversaries that their thermal weapons have no jurisdiction over your core density. You are the wall that absorbs the heat and stays cold. The combustion of ego, the fraud of indignation. The primary fuel source that allows fire to spread in the human mind is the biological ego. The ego is the holographic idea you have of yourself, your honor, and your identity. When someone insults a slave, the insult hits the ego, and the ego, feeling threatened, lights the fuse of indignation. It is a fatal chain. Indignation is the fire of the weak. It is the thermodynamic response of the organism that feels disrespected and needs to restore honor through shouting or counterattacking. Subject honor to the sieve of inert metal. Iridium has no honor. A stone monolith has no dignity to defend. These concepts are holographic collars. The system puts them on your neck to manipulate you. If someone can make you angry, then that someone is your master, for they have demonstrated they have the switch to your internal temperature. Thermal extirpation demands the voluntary suicide of the ego. You shed human dignity to acquire the invulnerability of dead matter. If a competitor in the boardroom disrespects you, your biological brain will try to ignite. You will apply the anesthesia of operative absolute zero. You observe the insult as a simple flow of sound waves hitting your eardrums. Since you have no ego to be offended, the spark falls on a sterile floor and goes out instantly. By eradicating the fuel of pride, you become unattackable. One cannot set fire to a room that has already been burned and coated in tungsten. You are the remains after the fire, an ashen structure that no longer reacts to the flame. You walk through the furnace of social conflict without your internal thermometers registering a rise. Aseptic data processing, stripping the flame of its oxygen. Every 3D crisis situation consists of two elements: inorganic math, data, numbers, and emotional oxygen, panic, narrative. When the market collapses, the biomass consumes both simultaneously, generating an explosion. The lethal operator masters the art of separating compounds and applying aseptic data processing. When the biological messenger, an employee or the news, runs to you screaming, "All is lost, we are ruined," they are injecting oxygen to create a fire. Your function as a hyperdense creator is to suck the oxygen from their lungs. You immediately isolate the math from the emotion. You filter the hysteria automatically. You translate the biological drama into its algorithmic equivalent: financial asset reduced by 40%, security breach identified in vector C, probability of litigation 85%. That is all. There is no tragedy. There is only a data packet requiring recalibration on the map. By stripping narrative oxygen, panic suffocates. You look at the raw, aseptic, and dead data and execute the containment maneuver with the bored silence of software correcting a syntax error. Aseptic processing shields you against trauma, turning the flesh's apocalypse into a simple administrative equation. You manage the ruins as if they were rows in a cold spreadsheet. The psychopathy of thermal absorption, swallowing enemy fire. Thermal extirpation is not merely a defensive shield, it is the architecture of a thermodynamic suction weapon. In collision physics, when a hot, fast body hits a cold, massive one, the hot body transfers its kinetic energy to the cold one in a futile attempt to heat it. Your adversaries will attack you with fire. As they are carbon-based creatures, they will use aggressive tactics and verbal violence. They will move fast and generate heat. You apply the psychopathy of thermal absorption. You become a heat sink of infinite mass. When the attack hits your inorganic chest, you do not repel it. Repelling implies friction and effort. You absorb it. You stay immovable, looking with the dead eyes of Iridium. You endure the siege without raising your voice. While they scream and exhaust their adrenaline reserves, you are devouring their kinetic energy and storing it in your static reactor. You turn their violence into your potential energy and weight. The enemy, realizing they have emptied their thermal arsenal and you haven't even blinked, experiences thermodynamic shock. Cold terror invades them. They have hit zero entropy. Exhausted and empty, they fall by their own metabolic wear. You won without moving an arm, limited to the passive work of not burning. Repudiating passion, the toxic gas of motivation. The biological indoctrination system has canonized the concept of passion. Corporate literature and gurus tell you that to govern, you must be passionate, that you must have fire in your gaze and operate from love for your mission. The Iridium Doctrine repudiates passion with geometric disgust. It is a leak. Passion is a chemical weakness. It is a hot gas that expands and evaporates quickly. Decisions taken in passion or hysterical motivation are the decisions of a thermodynamic drunkard. Empires built on passion melt from within because their leaders crumble when boredom and the nuclear winter of maintenance arrive. To subdue the biomass, you must purge yourself of motivation. The inorganic operator replaces passion with mechanical inevitability. You do not build your monopoly because you love what you do. Love is a porous thermal bridge. You build it because it is the ineludible consequence of your inertial superiority. You execute market domination with the same passion gravity uses to crush a meteorite, none. By eradicating motivation fire, you are immune to biological depression. Since you don't need the heat of enthusiasm to move, nothing can stop you. You execute at 0 degrees Kelvin, guaranteeing a gelida hardness for your empire. Tactical ice against provocation, anatomy of the inert insult. The 3D social battlefield is a constant exchange of provocations. The mammal tests rivals by seeking a reaction. If the rival reacts, gets angry or justifies, the tribe knows it has touched the nervous system. They found the soft flesh under the armor. Thermal extirpation shields this through the doctrine of tactical ice. When the environment tries to provoke you through insubordination or defamation, a heat missile is sent. You activate tactical ice. The anatomy of the inorganic response is sustained silence coupled with insulting bodily lethargy. If insulted in a boardroom, do not rush to answer. Delay the response unnaturally. Let the sound of the insult die in the air. Let 5, 10, 15 biological seconds of oppressive silence pass. Keep your facial muscles petrified in abyssal indifference. This tactical ice freezes the entire room. The tension the aggressor tried to generate is reflected back and pierces their own throat. They begin to sweat. The aggressor will try to speak again to fill the vacuum, destroying their own authority in the process. You have destroyed them from the core by applying the lethargy of inert matter against the spasms of a wounded animal. You win by being the only organism in the room that does not need to discharge the accumulated tension. The death of the reactive self, inorganic dissociation, the final neurobiological mechanism to annihilate basal temperature, is the consummation of inorganic dissociation. Emotional pain and stress are possible only because you identify with the biological container you inhabit. The human mind feels damage and says, "They are attacking me, it is hurting me, you must kill that me." The lethal operator executes the clinical death of that me. You apply a quantum scalpel cut between your consciousness, the iridium eye, and your carbon avatar. You are the architect in the dark control room. Your body and reputation are simply heavy machinery operated through a shielded glass panel. It is not you. If the market destroys your corporation, they are destroying a tank on the battlefield, not you. You remain safe in the bunker of your own stasis. If society repudiates you, they repudiate the holographic projection of your avatar. By dissociating from your 3D ego, the Matrix loses all the hostages it used to extort you. You cannot suffer burns if you are not the skin being burned. This psychopathic alienation endows you with inhuman strategic clarity, allowing you to take cruel and exact decisions. You sacrifice chess pieces, even those biology considered you, with the coldness of one who has no nerve endings connected to the board. The tyranny of thermal equilibrium, freezing by proximity. The zeroth law of thermodynamics dictates that if two bodies of different temperatures come into contact, heat flows to the colder body until they equalize. When you have murdered your basal temperature and stabilized your psyche at 0 degrees Kelvin, this law becomes your weapon of passive domination over the environment. You instate the tyranny of thermal equilibrium. You don't need motivational speeches or threats to bend the feverish minds around you. Your simple physical proximity begins to steal their heat. You enter a boardroom full of hysterical executives and sit down. You emit the gravity of your aseptic lethargy and your silence. Upon contact with your iridium electromagnetic field, the ecosystem is forced to yield its heat. Their anxieties are absorbed by the sink of your immobility. Minute by minute, the room's frantic rhythm decays. Voices go out. Erratic movements cease. Without a single imperative verb, you have frozen the environment and the will. The biomass submits to your inertial rhythm because the universe demands that the massive and coldest object dictates the final temperature of the system. You are the nuclear winter that puts out humanity's small bonfires. Your stillness is an infectious plague of cold that slows the heartbeats of those who oppose you. Eradicating the mammalian instinct, the coronation of metal. The peak of thermal extirpation is the total rewriting of your survival instincts. The mammalian instinct is summarized in fight or flight. Facing a threat, inferior biology heats up to fight or run. Both require movement and generate friction. Both are predictable for the superior predator who knows the map of fear. The operator who has assimilated the Iridium Doctrine eradicates both biological impulses. You do not flee because fear has been amputated. And you do not fight in the Matrix's physical terms because fighting implies recognizing the adversary has enough strength to require your muscular effort, giving them value and heat. You assume the third inertial option, the stasis of annihilation. Facing collapse, you become the osmium statue. You freeze your tactical metabolism. You anchor yourself in the vacuum of your own lack of reaction. You assume the only way to truly beat the universe is by showing it has no stimulus capable of raising your core. The monarch's crown is not gold, it is absolute ice. Look at yourself in the sterilized darkness of your mind, having decapitated the tumor of reactivity that kept the slave subject to temperature. You managed to suffocate carbon flammability. You understood that empathy and honor were thermal leaks, and you executed the cut. You mutilated your ego's melting point, substituting flesh for iridium, assuming the physics of invulnerability. You executed aseptic data processing, stripping social drama of its oxygen. You instated the psychopathy of absorption, converting each attack into kinetic energy that dies against your immovable heat sink. You murdered the fraud of passion and motivation, replacing it with the lethargy of mechanical inevitability. You imparted tactical ice, punishing insolence with oppressive silence. You carried out the death of the reactive self and imposed the tyranny of thermal equilibrium, freezing spaces by your proximity. Humanity's fever has died in your nervous system. The ecosystem's spark finds no gunpowder in your skull. You are the infinite friction dissipator, the Gelido Monolith. The first block of the doctrine has solidified your matrix at absolute zero. You are prepared for the geometry of the Empathic Void. Chapter 2. The Empathic Void, the repudiation of the biological bridge, the betrayal of mirror neurons, the hacking of mammalian hardware. For the phase transition from carbon to inert metal to be irreversible, the lethal operator must subject the human brain's deepest defect to war neurosurgery. Empathy. Biomass science takes pride in mirror neurons, a circuit designed by evolution so that the individual subconsciously imitates the emotional state of the organism before them. If a member of the tribe cries, your mirror neurons fire so that you feel sadness. If the tribe panics, you feel terror. For the prehistoric slave, this ensured pack cohesion against predators. For the hyperdense creator aiming to subdue the ashboard, this is an intolerable hardware hack. Your neurons are an organic Trojan horse. They are backdoors through which any thermal insect can infiltrate their hysteria, weakness, and failure directly into your command center. If you feel what the slave feels, you are yielding the sovereignty of your own temperature. Iridium has no mirror neurons. Inorganic matter does not reflect the pain of inferior compounds. The operator executes the empathic void, assuming that empathy is not a moral virtue, but a quantum security flaw that must be blocked, cauterized, and sealed with titanium. You must terminate the reflection to preserve the core. By refusing to mirror the biomass, you remain an unalterable constant in a world of frantic variables. Thermodynamics of compassion, the heat transfer bridge. Three-dimensional empathy is sold in the ecosystem under the noble name of compassion. Herd morality demands you be compassionate. They demand you put yourself in another's place. Subject compassion to the relentless laws of thermodynamics. In physics, a thermal bridge is an area with significantly higher heat conductivity. If the interior of a cold room has a thermal bridge connected to the hot exterior, heat will inevitably enter, ruining the chamber's stasis and rotting the elements it houses. Empathy is the thermal bridge of humanity. When you, stabilized at absolute zero, stop to feel compassion for an individual burning in their own incompetence, you are laying a conductive cable between their hell and your glacier. Physics does not forgive. Heat flows toward cold. Their anxiety, financial problems, and emotional crises will travel through your empathy and melt your focus. The biomass uses your compassion to extract your cold, relieve their burn, and leave you lukewarm. Repudiating the biological bridge is the only guarantee that your inertial stasis will not be plundered by beggars of comfort. You must seal the conduit. Every erg of energy spent feeling for the weak is an erg stolen from your own expansion. To be the master of the simulation, you must be the thermal exception, never the donor. The narcissism of the weak, suffering as an expropriation tool. Suffering on the ashboard is rarely accidental. In the overwhelming majority of cases, it is the mathematical result of the biomass's lightness and lack of inertial mass. However, the slave has weaponized their own suffering. Since they lack the gravitational force to command the matrix, they use pity as currency. They expose their wounds, narrate their miseries aloud, and exhibit vulnerability, hoping denser organisms, you, feel forced to stop and rescue them. This is the narcissism of the weak. They believe the universe owes them salvation simply because they feel pain. They use their scars as hooks to drag you down to their level. The lethal operator identifies the victim's cry as an attempt at parasitic expropriation. When an individual presents their tragedy expecting empathy, you are not witnessing human vulnerability. You are suffering a thermodynamic assault. They want to steal your time, money, or cognitive energy. The void demands gelido contempt. You strictly forbid yourself from validating their victim identity. Their pain is not your physical jurisdiction. Their financial bankruptcy is not your cosmic responsibility. Their crying is the sound of entropy consuming rotten wood, and iridium does not negotiate with ashes. Let the fire consume what lacks the density to survive. The dead stare, murdering acoustic resonance. The theory of the empathic void must manifest in your face's biology during social collision. When the thermal parasite tries to establish the biological bridge, they will use their voice and eye contact to force your mirror neurons to fire. They want you to nod and show concern or emit words of comfort. You must refuse. You must annihilate acoustic resonance immediately by deploying the dead stare. When the biomass cries or screams before you, order the total paralysis of your facial muscles. Stop blinking. Fix your pupils on their eyes, but adjust the optical depth of field to look through their skull, as if observing a blank wall behind them. Become an osmium statue. This lack of reflection terrifies mammalian biology. The parasite emits its hysteria frequency, expecting you to bounce the signal to confirm the bridge is set. Hitting the dead stare, the signal does not bounce. It is absorbed by a soundless vacuum. Without validation, the slave feels abyssal panic. They feel they are talking to the vacuum of outer space. Their narrative crumbles, their voice fades, and their manipulation attempt collapses. They are forced to retreat before the irrefutable evidence that you lack the organic receptors needed to process their blackmail. Your stillness is the weapon that drains their intent. The fallacy of tribal duty extirpating chemical loyalty. The most perverse control mechanism of the Matrix is the tribe. Family and community use a moral code embedded in your childhood to demand empathy. They call you insensitive if you refuse to carry their crosses. They argue that love requires sacrifice. Subject tribal love to the inorganic scanner. It is a leash. What the biomass calls loyalty is in reality a pact of shared mediocrity. They expect you to stop your own empire's acceleration to maintain the group's thermal balance. If one sinks, all must jump into the water to accompany the suffocation. The operator executes the repudiation of tribal duty. You renounce your citizenship. You understand your only absolute loyalty is toward your own inertial mandate's geometric purity. Any carbon organism demanding you yield your basal temperature in the name of affection is a structural enemy. The void immunizes you against guilt. Guilt is toxic waste injected when you don't behave like the slave they need. By emptying yourself of empathy, you empty yourself of guilt. An organism without guilt is the most ungovernable and lethal entity in 3D physics. You are no longer tethered by the chemical strings of the pack. You move with the independence of a rogue planet, unbothered by the gravitational whims of the biological herd. Inorganic isolation, the sealed chamber of consciousness. Consolidating the empathic void culminates in the architecture of a permanent inorganic isolation in your mind. It is not just about blocking toxic individuals. It is a total reconfiguration of how your consciousness interacts with the living universe. The slave walks with open mind pores. They feel pity for news. Their mind is a sponge absorbing humanity's putrid liquids. The Iridium monarch is impermeable. He has sealed his pores at a subatomic level. When you move through the ashboard, you are wrapped in a vacuum glass bell. You observe human tragedy with the aseptic distance an astronomer uses for a supernova 10,000 light-years away. You know the explosion is violent, but you do not burn, for there is no oxygen in the space separating you from it. Your disconnection is not an effort, it is your natural state. You are unreachable. You have turned your psyche into a sterilized operating room, where no human emotion bacteria can survive or infect your will. The asymmetry of compassion, the ruinous business of the flesh. If you need a numerical argument for the empathic void, analyze the energy exchange in any compassionate interaction. It is the worst thermodynamic investment an operator can make. When you, of high inertial mass and 0 Kelvin temperature, offer compassion to a gaseous individual, an asymmetric transfer occurs. You must spend a colossal amount of your own cognitive energy to descend to their vibrational level, simulate their emotion, and offer comfort. You extract gold from your vault to plug a hole in a paper boat. And in exchange for that massive voltage transfer, what do you receive? Nothing. You receive an empty thank you. You receive it from a parasite that will commit the same mathematical errors next week because you relieved the pain nature imposed as punishment so they would learn. By being empathic, you are subsidizing the universe's stupidity. The hyperdense creator closes this bank. No more emotional loans. Your energy is your own. The fraud of cruelty, the superiority of apathy. When you instate the void, and close your consciousness's borders, the system will react with the most predictable tool. They will call you cruel. They will accuse you of being a heartless monster. Apply semantic dissection. Cruelty implies emotional enjoyment of another's suffering. The sadist enjoys inflicting pain. The sadist needs the victim's reaction. Therefore, the sadist remains connected to the victim via a dark biological bridge. The sadist is still an emotional slave, just in reverse polarity. The lethal operator is not cruel. The lethal operator is inorganic. You do not enjoy the pain of the biomass. It is simply boring. It is as irrelevant as the corrosion pattern on old iron. It is structural apathy. Iridium is not cruel to soft matter when it crushes it. It is simply denser. Gravity is not sadistic when it downs a plane. It obeys mass. By transcending both compassion and cruelty, you rise toward the pantheon of nature's forces. The necrosis of others' expectations, suffocating judgment. The biological bridge of empathy is a two-way street. Just as you feel the urge to relieve their pain, you also feel the urge to meet their expectations. The slave feels anxiety when they believe they will disappoint someone. Within the empathic void, you execute the systematic necrosis of all others' expectations. Since other organisms have ceased to exist as relevant entities in your emotional radar, their opinions become inaudible static noise. You do not care if they are proud of you. You do not care if they despise you. Their minds are weak carbon vessels. Why should a neutron star care what a dust cloud thinks of its gravity? By suffocating the need to please, you amputate the last chain tying you to the matrix. You are an organism freed from the need to be good. In the instant you accept being the gelido and unreachable villain in the week's narrative, you acquire the absolute power to write your own triumph without asking for permission. The Titan of the Void. Look at yourself in the sterilized darkness of your own inorganic mind, having decapitated the cellular bridge that enslaved you to the pack's tragedy. You managed to suffocate the betrayal of mirror neurons. You understood that feeling others' pain was a thermodynamic hack of your hardware, and you sealed the gap. You mutilated the thermodynamics of compassion, refusing to be the thermal conductor that cools its own greatness to warm the slave's mediocrity. You executed the repudiation of the narcissism of the weak, assuming the victim's cry is an inertial assault attempt, and responded by deploying the dead stare in silence. You instated the repudiation of the tribal duty fallacy, emptying yourself of guilt and chemical loyalty toward those who demand your sacrifice. You assumed inorganic isolation, wrapping your consciousness in a vacuum bell that allows you to walk through the matrix without being contaminated by human suffering radiation. You gutted the asymmetry of compassion, closing the emotional bank to never again subsidize another's weakness with the pure gold of your hyperdense attention. You annihilated the cruelty fraud, rising above sadism. The bridge has been dynamited. You are the Titan of the Void. You are ready for immunity to corrosion. Chapter 3. Immunity to corrosion, blindness to moral judgment. The chemistry of oxidation, the theft of electrons. For the lethal operator to consummate his phase transition toward inorganic tyranny, he must understand the exact physics of structural destruction. In materials science, the most insidious threat is not kinetic impact, but corrosion. Corrosion is a silent, slow, and lethal chemical attack. It occurs when a reactive material is exposed. It is exposed to an oxidizing agent, like an acid or oxygen. At a subatomic level, the acid attacks the metal's surface and steals its electrons. By losing its electrons, the metal atoms lose their structural cohesion. Iron turns into rust, becomes porous, flaky, weak, and finally crumbles into dust under the slightest pressure. The human society, the three-dimensional ecosystem you inhabit, is an immense bath of sulfuric acid. The biomass cannot defeat a hyperdense individual through frontal clash, because they lack the kinetic mass to do so. Therefore, they use corrosion. The acid the matrix uses to steal the electrons of your will is composed of toxic agents. The agents are moral judgment, guilt, and social shame. When the carbon slave stands out or expropriates a territory, the herd throws moral acid at him. They judge him. They call him selfish, cruel, or heartless. because his psychological structure is porous and biologically dependent on the tribe. The slave absorbs the acid. His defenses oxidize. He feels guilt. By feeling guilt, he loses his inertial cohesion, yields his territory, apologizes, and collapses, returning his power to the matrix. To reign on the ashboard, the operator must eradicate his chemical vulnerability and embrace the physics of noble metals. He must become unreachable to the acid. The aqua regia of society, the coordinated thermodynamic attack. In chemistry, there is a mixture of nitric and hydrochloric acid known as aqua regia. Its level of acidity is so terrifyingly high that it is one of the few substances in the universe capable of dissolving gold and platinum. In the sociology of domination, aqua regia is the coordinated attack of public opinion and media defamation. It is the maximum level of toxicity that the matrix can generate against an organism that refuses to obey its laws of egalitarian thermodynamics. When you rise and build an asymmetric monopoly, the biomass will try to dissolve you by submerging you in the aqua regia of scandal. Subject iridium to this chemical test. Iridium is the most corrosion-resistant metal known to science. It is not attacked by any acid, any base, or even boiling aqua regia at extreme temperatures. The acids crash against its ultra-dense atomic lattice and bounce off, unable to steal a single electron. It remains pristine in the center of the toxic bath. The inorganic operator replicates this lattice in his psyche by instating immunity to corrosion. When the aqua regia of scandal falls on you, you do not justify yourself. You do not hold press conferences to clean your image. You do not apologize for your gravity. You assume the acid bath with a psychopathic lethargy. Insults and ethical judgments crash against your axiological blindness and slide off your polished metal surface. While the outer universe waits to see how you oxidize and crumble, you remain seated in the center of the acid, unalterable, proving that your structural integrity does not depend on the pH of public opinion. The fraud of biological morality, the network of parasites. To become blind to moral judgment, you must first dissect the nature of the very concept of morality. You have been indoctrinated to believe that good and evil are universal laws written in the stars, and that you must obey them under penalty of cosmic punishment. Apply the physics scalpel to this fraud. The material universe is absolute, terrifyingly amoral. Gravity does not care if the individual falling down a cliff is a saint or a murderer. It will crush him against the ground with the same mathematical acceleration. A black hole does not experience ethical dilemmas before devouring a galaxy. It simply obeys its own density. Morality is a biological construction, an invention of the prey. In the evolution of the biomass, weak organisms realized they could not compete against high-gravity predators in the battlefield of raw force. To survive, they invented a system of invisible rules, a web of silk threads to bind the giant. Ethics. They convinced the strong that using their strength was bad, and that weakness and sacrifice were virtues. Morality is the thermodynamic tool through which insects try to slow down the movement of tectonic plates. The lethal operator rejects this web. You break the social contract of the flesh. You act by your own law. You understand that your ascent to the top of the ashboard is not subject to the approval of a tribunal of parasites. You forbid yourself from evaluating your decisions under the spectrum of good and evil. By eradicating these concepts from your source code, you annul the ability of the matrix to inject the acid of its morality. The extirpation of guilt, the useless exothermic reaction. If morality is the acid, guilt is the oxidation itself consuming your interior. Guilt is an exothermic reaction. It burns energy from the inside out, weakening the metal structure and generating a scorching friction in the slave's brain. The weak individual feels guilt because he is terrified of damaging the tribe's cohesion. They feel they have offended the matrix, and their biology punishes them with emotional pain to force them to return to the herd and ask for forgiveness. It is a biological shock collar. In the phase transition toward Iridium, you execute the extirpation of guilt. This is a paramilitary procedure. You terminate the leak. When you take a decision that devastates your competition or breaks an inefficient bond, the biological residue of your brain will try to secrete guilt. In the instant you detect that heat, you apply the inorganic guillotine. You subject the event to the coldness of the equation. Did the decision increase your inertial mass? Yes. Did the decision collapse your target's wave function? Yes. Then the equation is mathematically perfect. The collateral suffering of the involved carbon organisms is simply atmospheric friction. A space rocket does not feel guilt for incinerating the launch pad when it takes off toward the vacuum. It is a physical cost. Fire and ground destruction are physical requirements to overcome gravity. The operator annuls guilt by assuming that damage to the weak is not a sin. It is the basic thermodynamic cost of operating an engine of infinite mass in a world of glass. You do not look back at the scorched earth. You look at the coordinate you have conquered. Deafness toward the ought-to-be, repudiating the herd's mandate. The acid of social corrosion also presents itself in the form of expectations. It is the oppressive ought-to-be of the 3D matrix. Society demands that you be a humble leader, a fair competitor, and a grateful victor. They build an ethical mold for you and demand that you pour your liquid metal into it. If you obey the ought-to-be, you become an interchangeable piece of machinery in the system's gears. The hyper-dense creator instates deafness toward the ought-to-be. You do not pay homage to the slave's codes of chivalry. You do not compete fairly, because fairness is a concept invented by losers to level the battlefield. You compete with a ruthless asymmetry. You use your lethargy, acoustic isolation, and hyperdensity to crush the competition before they can articulate a defense. When the biomass points at you and screams, "That is not ethical," you apply the empathic void. You do not hear the complaint. You look through them with the iridium eye. You make it clear that the inorganic universe does not recognize their rules of etiquette. The metal monarch does not attend the moral trials of insects, and by refusing to recognize their court, you take away their jurisdiction to condemn you. You are a sovereign entity, beyond the reach of their petty and warm social contracts. Axiological blindness. Gravity is the only metric. Immunity to corrosion requires you to replace humanity's table of values with a new astrophysical measurement table. The slave values kindness, empathy, sacrifice, and humility. Those are axiological, moral values. The lethal operator suffers from intentional axiological blindness. You stop seeing in colors of good or bad. You forbid yourself from valuing the world under the light of morals. Your only metric, the only indicator on your crystal prison's dashboard, is inertial gravity, mass, control. When you audit a partner or a corporate strategy, you do not ask, "Is this morally correct?" You ask, "Does this increase my core's hyperdensity? Does this minimize my thermal friction? Does this allow me to collapse matter with greater lethality?" If the answer is yes, the act is executed with the precision of a geological automaton. By transmuting your value system into a thermodynamic model, the acid of human judgment ceases to have a chemical surface to react upon. You no longer speak the same language. They fire bullets of ethical indignation at you, and you receive them as if they were fluctuations in the stock price index, raw, dead data that does not affect your temperature. You are a block of metal that does not register the microscopic pricks of their moral needles. The fraud of false virtue, modesty as a corrosive agent. Within the acid bath of the matrix, there is a highly solvent chemical that slaves use to lower the density of the strong, modesty. The system condemns pride and asymmetric arrogance and demands that achievers be modest and humble, hiding their power to not hurt the thermal feelings of the herd. It is a lie. Modesty is a biological lie. It is the act of apologizing for possessing gravity. Iridium does not apologize for weighing. The lethal operator repudiates the false virtue of humility. You do not lower your voice, nor minimize your financial expropriations, nor hide your intellect to make the mediocre feel comfortable. The slave's comfort is not your thermodynamic problem. You exhibit your inertia with the silent and oppressive weight of a tectonic fault. You do not boast. Boasting is a gas leak, a need for validation. You simply occupy 3D space with a geometric arrogance so undeniable that the matrix is forced to look away. By rejecting modesty, You communicate to the ecosystem that your power is not an accident to be forgiven, but a dictatorial law to be obeyed. You are a fact of nature. Your existence is a mountain of metal, and mountains do not apologize to the wind for blocking its path. You are the unyielding presence that defines the room. The structure of the incorruptible monarch. Look at yourself in the gelida vastness of your own mind, having eradicated the chemical reactions that oxidized your authority's core. You managed to suffocate the chemistry of oxidation. You understood social judgment was sulfuric acid designed to steal your will's electrons, and you transmuted into iridium. You mutilated society's aqua regia, assuming collective scandal with an unshakable lethargy, waiting in silence for the acid to evaporate against your blindness. You executed the repudiation of the fraud of morality, recognizing ethics as the web of parasites and assuming the amorality of the cold and distant stars. You instated the extirpation of guilt, drowning the exothermic reaction of remorse and accepting the pain of the collateral biomass as simple atmospheric friction of your inertial takeoff. You imparted deafness toward the ought-to-be, refusing to be poured into the slave's mold, competing with a sociopathic asymmetry. You adopted axiological blindness, replacing good and evil with the only absolute metric of the inorganic universe, gravity and mass. And you annihilated modesty as a corrosive agent, refusing to apologize for your density and occupying your throne with the gelida arrogance of the perfect metal. You are untouchable. The matrix no longer has chemicals capable of dissolving you. Your gears do not know the rust of pity. You are the incorruptible monarch. The third vault of the Iridium Doctrine has sealed your impermeability. You are ready to completely abandon the fear of the end and operate from the abyss through Necro-Geometry. Chapter 4. Necro-Geometry, operating from Cadaveric Stasis. The biology of cowardice, the self-preservation instinct as a shackle. The architecture of 3D slavery is not held by steel chains, but by a genetic code implanted deep in the reptilian brain, the self-preservation instinct. The carbon-based organism is programmed to be terrified of loss. They have a pathological fear of physical death, which in the modern ashboard has mutated into holographic terrors. These are the fear of losing social status, financial bankruptcy, abandonment, or public failure. Subject fear to fluid physics. Fear is the centripetal force that keeps the biomass spinning around mediocrity. When the slave has something to lose, he becomes predictable. His biological ego is a gigantic and porous surface. The egregore, the control system, observes this surface and understands where to apply pressure. If the system threatens your prestige, you yield. If the market threatens ruin, you panic and accept servitude. The instinct of preservation makes you a hostage of your own life. You are a biological prisoner of your own potential non-existence. The lethal operator diagnoses the hope of biological and social survival as the ultimate shackle. To reach the inorganic invulnerability of iridium, you cannot simply manage fear. You must amputate the very object of fear. You must execute necro-geometry, the topological reconfiguration of your mind based on the premise that you are dead. Tactical ego suicide, assimilation of cadaveric stasis. In war, the most terrifying adversary is not the one with the best weapons, nor the one with numerical superiority. The invincible adversary is he who has crossed the line of no return and accepted his own death before stepping onto the battlefield. You cannot extort, threaten, or negotiate with a corpse. It is a thermodynamic void. To govern the matrix, you must subject your biological ego to tactical suicide. You enter your anechoic chamber, close the obsidian perimeter, and carry out the execution in the silence of your mind. You observe everything biology taught you to treasure, your corporate reputation, your capital, and your public image, and you incinerate it. You incinerate it in the reactor of your own will. You force yourself to accept, with psychopathic lethargy, the total annihilation of your identity. You assume you are already bankrupt. You assume society has already repudiated you. You assume your empire is reduced to dust. This is the state we call cadaveric stasis. When you return to the market operating from this state of clinical death of the ego, your mental geometry has changed. You are no longer a voluminous and scared target. You have become a zero-friction singularity. The competitor tries to threaten you and discovers with horror that he is trying to rob the wallet of a ghost. The market tries to subdue you with the terror of bankruptcy, and you observe it with the iridium eye, because the fear of ruin cannot affect an entity that has already assimilated total destruction in its source code. By suiciding your ego, you shed the only lever the universe had to move you against your will. You are the unmovable. The anatomy of the veto on hope, the gas of the weak. Within the slave's ecosystem, hope is venerated as the maximum virtue. They indoctrinate you to have faith, to hope that everything turns out well, and to trust that the 3D universe will reward your intentions. Subject hope to the scanner of high-density thermodynamics. It is a paralyzing gas. It is a confession of impotence. When you have hope, you are admitting you lack control over reality's variables. Therefore, you must sit and plead that chaos organizes in your favor. Hope requires the individual to keep his nervous system in suspense, burning emotional energy, waiting for a result that is not his. The unalterable monolith instates the veto on hope. The inorganic operator does not hope for anything. You forbid yourself the comfort of faith in chance. If you enter a negotiation or launch a financial offensive, you do not cross your fingers. You execute the algorithms and collapse the wave function with your focused gravity. If the result is destruction, you accept it with coldness. By extirpating hope, you extirpate anxiety. The biomass lives sick with anxiety because they suffer the space between what they desire and what they expect. Operating from cadaveric stasis, you do not desire or hope. You simply calculate and collide. The corpse does not expect to resurrect, therefore it does not suffer the time. Financial necromancy, currency as inorganic flow. The most obvious vulnerability of inferior biology on the ashboard is emotional attachment to money. The slave associates capital with mammalian survival, food and shelter. Therefore, when the slave invests or competes, his hands tremble. Each drop in the stock charts is a direct hit to his central nervous system. They operate from panic and euphoria. Thermal boiling. The Iridium Doctrine requires you to exercise financial necromancy. Money is not a biological resource. It is a mathematical representation of inertial energy storage. It is dead information. When you operate from Necro-Geometry, you disconnect from the capital's survival value. Whether you move $10 or 10 billion, your pulse must not register any alteration. You treat capital with the sociopathy of a necromancer moving inanimate pieces on a board. Not fearing poverty, since your ego already assimilated bankruptcy, your expropriation decisions become obscenely bold and geometrically perfect. The market is composed of millions of scared individuals taking hysterical decisions to protect their mortgages and pride. When an inorganic entity enters that market, devoid of emotional attachment and ready to risk the entire board without blinking, the biomass retreats. You win because your tolerance for exposure is absolute. Contempt for legacy, the vanity of tombs. Another lever the egregore uses to manipulate the strongman is the illusion of legacy. They tell you that you must build something that survives your death, that you must leave your name in history. Apply the rigor of cosmic entropy to this biological illusion. The 3D universe is a relentless shredder. It erases everything. On a geological timescale, every statue and every digital record will be reduced to stardust. The need for a legacy is nothing more than the agonizing kick of an ego terrified by its own insignificance, pleading not to be forgotten by a species that will also be annihilated. The lethal operator assumes contempt for legacy. You do not operate to be remembered. You do not seek the posthumous applause of the biomass. Your power architecture is executed for the inorganic pleasure of the inertial now. To collapse matter today, to demonstrate absolute dominance over chaos while inhabiting this container. You stop trying to please future ghosts. By eradicating the concern for history and the future after your decease, you free a monstrous amount of cognitive bandwidth. You concentrate on the expropriation of the living with a cruelty purified of vanity. You build not for the eyes of the unborn, but for the weight of your current gravity. Your empire is a statement of now. The cadaver's asymmetry, subduing those with something to lose. When the lethal operator, stabilized in his cadaveric stasis, enters direct conflict with a matrix adversary, a terrifying phenomenon of asymmetric thermodynamics occurs. Imagine the negotiation table. Your adversary, a CEO or a politician, sits across from you. His biology is ignited. He is sweating and vibrating with heat. His neurons are frantically calculating how this deal will affect his bonus, his marriage, and his prestige. His mind is a network of vulnerabilities flashing red. He is fighting for his life. You sit across from him, operating from Necro-Geometry. You bring no vulnerability to the room because you have shed your ego. You do not care if the negotiation explodes and the corporation burns, because you have already visually inhabited those ashes and found them indifferent. In this clash, the adversary feels your void. His mammalian instinct detects he has no threat to offer you. He feels he is trying to blackmail a lead wall. It is useless. The asymmetry is brutal. He is willing to compromise everything not to lose. You are willing to destroy everything because you have already accepted absolute loss. Faced with this inorganic vacuum, the adversary fractures. They rush to offer concessions. They yield territory because flesh always kneels before inertial death. The eye of nothingness, blindness to intimidation. Human society is ruled by visual and holographic hierarchies. The parasitic system designs power symbols to intimidate inferior organisms, expensive suits, titles, and colossal architectures. The slave enters the superior's office, sees these holograms, and his temperature rises from panic. Authority is a thermal weapon. Necro-Geometry destroys the optical perception of the hologram through the eye of nothingness. The corpse does not recognize the insignia of the living. When you operate from inorganic stasis, your retina becomes immune to 3D intimidation. If the individual has billions or directs a state, your brain does not process authority. You look at them with lethargic dissection. You strip their existence of the holographic theater and reduce them to what they really are. A container of carbon and biological fears, just as porous and destructible as the most miserable insect. This lack of thermodynamic respect paralyzes the false powerful. They hit your iris void. Accustomed to biomass paying thermal homage, they meet a hyperdense entity, looking at them as if they were already on an autopsy table. By not registering their importance, you snatch their power to subdue you, leveling the battlefield through the geometric superiority of your own apathy. You are the only real thing in a room of ghosts. The paradox of absolute freedom, the power of tactical nihilism. The control system teaches you that nihilism is a paralyzing disease. They say if nothing matters, you sink into depression. That is the nihilism of the weak, the slave who surrenders because the universe does not hug him. The Iridium monarch weaponizes this same absence of meaning, transmutating it into tactical nihilism. By adopting cadaveric stasis and recognizing the universe is a cold abyss void of purpose, you do not get depressed. You become terrifyingly free. If there is no cosmic tribunal or karmic rules, and you have already murdered your ego, then there are no thermodynamic rules preventing you from designing your own dictatorship. Absolute freedom is not born from possessing all options. It is born from being ready to lose them all in a microsecond without blinking. Tactical nihilism is the combustion engine of your audacity. Because nothing matters intrinsically, you are free to assign gravitational mass to your goal. You operate in the moral vacuum. The petrification of risk, the math of all or nothing. The slave manages risk by trying to minimize losses. They seek security. They diversify strategies so that if something fails, they do not suffer too much. This diversification is the fragmentation of density. It is the open parachute we have repudiated. In the state of Necro-Geometry, risk undergoes clinical petrification. Since you have already assimilated the worst possible scenario and feel comfortable in that thermal nothingness, risk ceases to be an emotional variable. It becomes a simple penetration vector. When the operator attacks, he does not cover his back with biological contingency plans. You put 100% mass on one number. This suicidal concentration of risk terrifies the matrix, but it is the only physical method to force an imperial-scale wave function collapse. If you keep a percentage of your mass just in case, the penetration force never reaches the critical threshold. You must petrify your risk perception. You are a stone falling to the bottom. The Titan of Zero Geometry. Look at yourself in the black vastness of your tactical extinction, having mutilated the survival instinct that turned kings into hostages of their own throne. You managed to suffocate the biology of cowardice. You understood fear was the Matrix's lever, and you executed tactical ego suicide. You are now unmovable. You mutilated your biological identity to assume the absolute invulnerability of cadaveric stasis. You executed the anatomy of the veto on hope, gutting faith to substitute it with the relentless collapse of math. You instated financial necromancy, playing with capital as inert data on an obsidian board. You are cold. You murdered vanity through contempt for legacy, extirpating the need for future applause. You wielded the cadaver's asymmetry, watching carbon men crumble because their fears hit your repudiation of preservation. You imparted the punishment of the eye of nothingness, paralyzing the powerful with your unbribable retina. You adopted tactical nihilism, discovering the freedom to rewrite reality and reach the petrification of risk by betting your total inertia on a single vector. Fear is extirpated. Hope is dead. You are the Titan of Zero Geometry. The ghost of loss is gone. You are ready to crush enemy friction through kinetic assimilation. Chapter 5. Kinetic Assimilation. Absorbing the Matrix's impact. The physics of collision, the elastic limit of biomass. In the inexorable mechanics of solids, when two bodies collide, the kinetic energy of the moving object must be transferred or dissipated. If the body receiving the impact lacks the structural density, it experiences plastic deformation or total fracture. Its atomic bonds break. Its geometry is destroyed. Human biomass lives terrified of collision. The 3D ashboard is a geometric shooting range where impact is the only absolute guarantee. If you dare to occupy space or expand your perimeter, the Matrix will hit you. It will hit you with betrayal, financial crises, and the aggression of hysterical competitors. The carbon slave reacts from the fragility of his elastic limit. When the market hits him, the slave dents. They mourn the loss, become traumatized, and fracture. Their mental structure breaks under the pressure of invading kinetic energy. They carry the scars of every collision as proof of their biological vulnerability. The lethal operator understands that evading impact is the coward's tactic, and blocking it through emotional shields is an unacceptable thermodynamic expense. You do not defend against the blow. You execute kinetic assimilation. You design your architecture to possess such density that your geometry suffers no alteration. Repudiating the counterattack, the hemorrhage of revenge. The mammal's first biological reaction to being hit, if not destroyed, is the counterattack. It is eye for an eye. The parasitic system has programmed you to believe revenge is an act of strength, that defending honor by hitting back proves superiority. Apply quantum physics to revenge. It is a fatal leak. Revenge is the thermodynamic confession that the enemy has managed to alter your state. If someone attacks and you divert your collimated laser to attack back, the enemy has won. They made you stop building your monopoly to spend voltage on them. Revenge is a thermal bridge through which your energy leaks into irrelevance. The inorganic operator repudiates the counterattack. Iridium does not take revenge on the hammer. When the adversary launches an offensive, you forbid yourself from reacting thermally. You do not alter your vector. You spend no energy formulating a response. You endure the impact in absolute and lethargic silence. By refusing to counterattack, you cut the feedback loop of violence. The enemy biomass expects the friction of your response to keep its own boiler lit. By offering no friction, you leave them hitting the vacuum. This lack of reciprocity is the most atrocious geometric contempt, denying them confirmation that they even exist. The philosophy of the anvil, destroying another's tool. The 3D ecosystem worships the hammer. Everyone wants to be the striking force, but in high-temperature metallurgy, the hammer is just a tool that wears out, nicks, and eventually breaks from material fatigue after thousands of impacts. The true sovereign of the forge is not the hammer, it is the anvil. The anvil is a solid, cold, and static mass. It does not move, it does not attack, it simply is. Due to its immense density, every time the hammer hits it, the kinetic energy bounces back toward the hammer itself. The anvil destroys the tool by forcing it to deal with the physical consequences of its own violence. To subdue the biomass, you must become the Iridium Anvil. You instate kinetic assimilation by assuming total immobility against the siege. Competitors will spend their capital and stress their boards to try to move you. You stay still. You maintain your position with the deaf blindness of a monolithic structure. By crashing against your immobility, your enemy's energy becomes destructive shockwaves that return to their own nervous systems and balance sheets. They ruin themselves trying to move that which cannot be moved. You win the war of attrition because you possess the greatest tolerance for staying absolutely still. The castration of betrayal, assimilating friendly fire. The most lethal kinetic impact in human biology is betrayal. When a partner or ally breaks the pact and attacks your back, the slave's mind disintegrates. Betrayal mixes material damage with the chemical pain of a wounded ego, generating a thermodynamic collapse that takes decades to heal. It is a structural poison. The lethal operator executes the castration of betrayal through fluid mathematics. Since you have instated Necro-Geometry, assuming all is lost, and the Empathic Void, extirpating attachment, human betrayal is no longer a traumatic surprise. For Iridium, loyalty is simply a temporary statistical probability. You know carbon organisms will fail under the right pressure of greed or fear. Therefore, when betrayal occurs, your nervous system suffers no spasm. Biological pain has been castrated. You observe the traitor not as a knife in the back, but as a simple readjustment in your equation's vectors. They are no longer a tool. You absorb the loss of capital without blinking, rewrite the code, and continue the march. By not experiencing emotional trauma, the traitor realizes their stab did not penetrate the flesh, but broke against the armor. You strip them of the pleasure of seeing you bleed, which is the most terrifying inorganic punishment. The black hole jujitsu, devouring another's momentum. In Earth's martial arts, the principle of jujitsu is using the opponent's force against them. In the astrophysics of mental domination, this evolves into black hole jujitsu. When the matrix throws a massive impact at you, a global crisis or a legislative change, you do not raise a concrete wall to stop it. If you oppose direct resistance, you suffer friction. The inorganic operator opens the singularity's mouth and swallows the event whole. You use the chaos to mask your own movements. If the crisis sows panic, you assimilate that energy of others' terror to acquire their assets at a fraction of their thermal density. The matrix's impact is not an accident that ruins your plans. The impact is energy injected into the system that you steal to accelerate your own core's rotation. Everything the universe throws with homicidal intent is processed and converted into fuel for your expropriation machinery. The physical world yields to you, transmuting pain into processing speed. The carbon body is full of nerve endings. When the matrix hits, the flesh registers pain. The slave obeys pain. He stops, shrinks, or flees. Pain is the ecosystem's red light. The operator executing kinetic assimilation practices a paramilitary rewiring of his nervous system. You must decouple the signal from the reaction. Pain becomes pure inorganic metric. When you experience massive damage, ruin, or extreme exhaustion, instead of stopping, you use the pain signal as a data processing accelerator. If it hurts, the atmospheric pressure is high. If the pressure is high, the available energy is immense. You transmute suffering into math. You work deeper. You calculate faster. You collapse the wave function with psychopathic aggressiveness. By transforming pain into the high-octane gasoline of your inertial engine, the concept of torture disappears. How can the universe punish you if every lash becomes the thrust you need to cross the finish line? The polished surface advantage, the sliding vector. A metal's resistance to impact depends not only on internal density, but on the perfection of its surface. If a metal is porous or has cracks, like an ego full of insecurities and moral opinions, the matrix's impact will find a grip point to leverage and tear the structure. You must be subatomically smooth. The Iridium Doctrine, after purging social judgment and external noise, has left your mind's surface polished. You are a perfect zero-friction mirror. When the biomass hits you with psychological manipulation or emotional blackmail, their kinetic energy finds nowhere to anchor. Their words slide, their threats skid. The blow lands, but lacking a friction vector to penetrate, it deflects harmlessly into the void. This is passive assimilation. Not only do you absorb what hits directly, but your inorganic architecture ensures that 99% of humanity's attacks never manage to transfer their energy to your core. Acoustic closure before violence, the terror of mutism. Impact physics also generates acoustics. When two bodies collide, the sound reverberates. When the slave is wounded, he screams, he complains, writes victimization speeches, and demands justice. The scream is the acoustic dissipation of his weakness. The iridium anvil does not scream. It resonates inaudibly. When you experience the ashboard's kinetic violence, you execute a total acoustic closure. You swallow the blow without emitting a single phoneme. Immaterial blood may flow inside your corporation, but outward, you project the most terrifying immobility. The biomass meets the silence of deep space and panics. This absence of acoustic feedback introduces biological panic into your adversaries. Hearing no complaints, they assume their weapon failed. They assume they did no damage. They assume they face a thermodynamic monster that does not bleed. Mutism under fire is the tactic that fractures the aggressor's will before ammo runs out. The gravitational accumulation of the siege. If you maintain kinetic assimilation for enough time, your psyche's physics experience an anomalous evolution. Every blow you don't return, every crisis you devour, every betrayal you chew in silence adds potential energy to your core. Energy is not destroyed. Since you didn't dissipate it, it remains confined. You begin to weigh more. You become geologically denser. The gravity of your presence becomes overwhelming. Carbon men feel thermodynamic discomfort when you enter the room because they subconsciously perceive the monstrous amount of impacts you house without having broken. You are a pressurized vault of cataclysms. You are the beast that swallowed the abyss and integrated it into its digestive system. This accumulation grants you an inertial authority that no title or wealth can simulate, because it is the authority of unshakable matter. You are the survivor of every storm the Matrix could conjure, now stronger for it, the extinction of the fear of collapse. The last effect of assimilating the Matrix's impact is the empirical eradication of the fear of the future. The biomass lives imagining blows they haven't received, and that terror prevents them from collapsing matter. But you, having crossed the fire, reach the inorganic epiphany. You are now the hammer's end. You discover the Matrix has no ammunition capable of murdering you. You understand that if the economy collapses, you will simply be a heavier anvil. If society isolates you, you will be a more concentrated monolith. You have hacked Newton's mechanics. Every action against you causes an internal acceleration in your favor. The friction devourer. Look at yourself in the majestic stillness of your own geometric density, having decapitated the elastic limit that condemned humans to break. You managed to suffocate the physics of collision. You transmuted your mind to devour the Matrix's energy. You mutilated the animal instinct of revenge to save your laser. You executed the philosophy of the anvil, forcing ecosystem hammers to fracture against your apathy. You instated the castration of betrayal, assimilating fire as dead algorithmic information. You mastered black hole jujitsu, using the ashboard's hostility to fuel your reactor. You turned pain into processing speed. You applied the lethargy of acoustic closure, denying enemies the satisfaction of the scream. And finally, you executed gravitational accumulation, swallowing disasters until becoming heavier than all adversaries combined. World friction no longer wears your armor. It polishes it. You are the friction devourer. Chapter 6. The Monolith's Acoustics in Organic Language. The physics of propagation, noise as thermal dissipation. To execute the phase transition toward inorganic matter, you must subject human communication to the laws of acoustics and thermodynamics. In wave physics, sound is a mechanical vibration propagating through a medium. Generating sound requires energy. Vocal cords vibrate, agitating oxygen molecules and creating pressure waves in space. Human biomass suffers from a truly pathetic acoustic incontinence. The carbon slave speaks constantly because he needs to confirm his existence. If they emit no noise, they feel they disappear. They speak to justify themselves, to seek approval, to fill the void, and above all because their internal temperature is boiling and they must dissipate heat. Every useless word from the biomass is a thermal leak. It is inertial energy escaping their skulls, lost to air friction. The lethal operator embodying Iridium diagnoses wordiness as a hemorrhage of mass. A stone monolith in the desert emits no sound. It does not vibrate to prove it is there. Its geological density is enough evidence. You instate the monolith's acoustics, the dictatorial eradication of superfluous noise. You understand that each time you open your biological mouth, you yield electrons to the ecosystem. Thus, inorganic language repudiates chat. It repudiates sterile debate. It repudiates the need to fill silence. You become a miser of acoustic friction. You reserve the vibration of your vocal cords exclusively for moments when the propagation of your voice is the direct vector to collapse 3D matter. You speak only to dictate, never to converse. Your words are no longer air. They are projectiles launched from the vacuum of your core to hit the target with the crushing force of metal, eradicating the mammalian tone, amputating the melody of plea. The danger of the voice lies not only in the quantity of words, but in the modulation of sound. Evolution has gifted mammals with a tonal spectrum designed to transmit urgency, fear, submission, or hysteria. When the slave is anxious, the pitch of his voice rises. His frequencies become sharp. His speech accelerates in a biological attempt. He attempts to transfer information before being devoured. Every emotional inflection in the voice is the melody of plea. It is a thermodynamic confession that the environment has jurisdiction over your pulse. The Iridium Doctrine demands the eradication of the mammalian tone. You carry out a paramilitary castration of your own prosody. You extirpate musicality from your phrases. When forced to emit sound on the ashboard, your voice must lack any trace of anxiety, haste, anger, or joy. You assume the flat frequency. You speak with a mechanical and oppressive lethargy, like an automaton dictating artillery coordinates. You strip the flesh from your sound. By stripping your voice of emotional melody, the interlocutor crashes against a steel wall. The reptilian brain of your adversaries is searching for acoustic micro-expressions to measure your stress and know if their attack works. By delivering a voice that is inorganic and gelida, you deny them telemetry. You leave them blind and deaf. An individual who speaks with the same bored metallic cadence to announce an empire's destruction as he does to ask for a glass of water is an individual the ecosystem cannot decipher. If they cannot decipher you, they cannot subdue you. Your voice becomes a constant in a world of frantic variables, an unyielding sound from the abyss. Offensive mutism, the acoustic vacuum as a torture chamber. Society has labeled silence as an absence, a lack of response. In hyper-dense power architecture, silence is not empty space, it is a blunt mass. It is offensive mutism. When the lethal operator faces aggression or the hysteria of the outside world, the most devastating reaction is not the scream or the threat. It is absolute silence. It is silence sustained beyond biological comfort limits. Imagine a subordinate or adversary throwing a complaint or ultimatum at you. They expect the friction of your response. They expect you to open your mouth and release heat. You apply offensive mutism. You sit before them, pin the iridium eye on their face, and emit no phoneme. You let the seconds run. 10, 15, 30 biological seconds. Inorganic silence is a torture chamber for the biomass. Not receiving the acoustic bounce, atmospheric pressure in the adversary's mind begins to multiply. They feel panic. Discomfort becomes suffocating. To relieve this thermal tension, the slave will start to talk again. They will begin to stammer, retract, and offer concessions against themselves, simply to fill the acoustic crater you have opened. You have shattered their tactical position and expropriated their will without investing a single millivolt of verbal energy. Your silence has weighed more than their words, crushing their intent in the void. The syllable economy, the density of the decree. When the vacuum must be broken, execution must be lethal. In inorganic language thermodynamics, a phrase's mass is inversely proportional to the number of words used. Wordiness is gaseous, conciseness is hyperdense. The biomass adorns its phrases. They use preambles and tactical apologies like, "I think," or "in my humble opinion." They wrap their message in cotton layers to not hurt the tribe. The Iridium monarch instates the syllable economy. Your verbal interventions cease to be conversations and transmute into decrees. You cut biological fat from your syntax. You use short sentences, structured like tungsten blocks. You offer no preambles or explanations. If an order, denial, or affirmation can be delivered in 3 words, using 4 is an act of treason to your inertial mass. By reducing language to the minimum atomic expression, each word you drop into the air acquires monstrous gravity. The matrix learns that when you emit sound, it is to collapse the wave function of a decision. Dense language is not negotiated. It is obeyed by the mathematical weight of its own brevity. You do not explain, you define, you do not argue, you state. Each syllable is a cold stone that settles into reality, leaving no room for the interlocutor to inject their own gaseous interpretation. You own the meaning through your scarcity. Dialogue asymmetry, denying the interlocutor's jurisdiction. The concept of dialogue is a democratic myth invented by inferior civilization to simulate equality. Dialogue assumes 2 entities possess the same gravitational mass and that, through friction, they will reach equilibrium. Iridium does not dialogue with carbon. No thermodynamic equilibrium exists between a star and a meteor. There is only assimilation or annihilation. You apply dialogue asymmetry. When forced to interact, you do not recognize the interlocutor's jurisdiction. If asked a useless question, do not answer it. Answer the question you dictate should have been asked, or emit a mandate that annuls the premise. You do not follow their lead. If an adversary tries to drag you into their acoustic terrain through insults, you ignore their semantics. You break the interaction's flow by applying lethargy. You show the interlocutor, through the rhythmic indifference of your words, that you are the dictator of time and space in that room. The narrative dies by your hand. Conversation dies because you amputate its oxygen, forcing the matrix to orbit the only center of gravity that remains unalterable. By refusing to play by their rules of exchange, you render their arguments weightless. You do not participate in the friction. You simply observe it from the height of your own soundless sovereignty. Anechoic absorption, extinguishing the enemy's scream. Physical architecture has rooms called anechoic chambers. They are lined with foam wedges that absorb 99.9% of sound. In an anechoic chamber, there is no echo. If someone screams, the sound dies within millimeters, swallowed by the walls. It is a dead acoustics environment. Your mind must function exactly like this chamber. The 3D ecosystem will throw its worst frequencies at you. The complaints of a broken market, the shrieks of desperate competitors, or the crying of effective parasites. When this noise hits common biomass, the sound echoes. It amplifies panic. When the noise hits you, you execute anechoic absorption. You hear it, but you refuse it. You refuse to reflect it. You emit no validation. You do not flinch. Your obsidian face and lethargic posture swallow the adversary's hysteria without returning a single wave of recognition. The enemy screams, and their scream simply extinguishes in the vacuum of your apathy. They find that making noise before you is a waste. Anechoic absorption suffocates society's stridency, forcing those around you to reduce their volume and speed until they submit to the silent heaviness of your own force field. You extinguish the fire of their words by depriving them of an atmosphere to resonate in. You are the end of their signal, the black hole of their intent. Sub-bass frequency, the vibration that collapses flesh. If mutism is the vacuum and the decree is the mass, the lethal operator's voice must be calibrated to emit at the correct frequency of destruction. Scared mammals emit high frequencies, treble. Small, fragile, and hollow objects sound sharp when hit. Uncalculable mass objects emit in sub-bass frequencies. It is the sound of the deep. A tectonic fault sliding or a glacier splitting emits sub-bass. When the Iridium monarch is forced to use language, he adjusts his vocal cords to the sub-bass frequency. You lower your tone to the lower limit of your register. You speak from the diaphragm, not the throat. You slow the cadence of pronunciation unnaturally. This frequency is not merely a trick, it is inertial physics. Sub-bass sounds travel through solid bodies. When you speak with the vibration of a slow-motion tectonic plate, the biomass feels your words in their sternum. The monstrous slowness of your speech projects the illusion of infinite time. You communicate you are in no hurry. You tell the insects that 3D time is yours to crush, and that your existence is so dense the universe must wait for you to exhale the syllable. The sub-bass frequency paralyzes the opponent's nervous system, subjecting them to a resonance of pure domination. Your voice becomes a physical force that physically shakes the weak. The murder of justification, repudiating the tribunal. The most destructive acoustic infection of the inferior mind is the need for justification. Biomass, when taking a decision, feels the automatic compulsion to explain why. They explain motives to partners and the market. Justifying is a kneeling posture. When you justify, you assume the listener is a judge. You are a plea. You are granting jurisdictional authority to evaluate or approve your motives. You are pleading for retrospective permission. The Iridium Doctrine outlaws justification under penalty of tactical annihilation. The inorganic operator executes the murder of justification. You do not give explanations, you give only the final fact. If you decide to dismantle a department or liquidate an asset, you issue the order and submerge in silence. If the affected biomass asks why, you crush them with the vacuum. You answer, "Because I have decided so," or simply maintain the dead stare. The monolith is not accountable to the sand surrounding it. Your motives are math. They are classified matter, inaccessible to inferior biology. By extirpating the why from your vocabulary, you transform into a natural phenomenon. A hurricane is not asked to explain its motives for raking a coast. It is simply feared and obeyed. You are a fact of nature that does not need a preamble to exist or to destroy. The tyranny of the pause, time dilation in speech. In music as in language, power resides not in notes played, but in space left between them. Biomass has a phobia of the pause. A 3-second silence in conversation causes them tachycardia. The lethal operator turns this biological fear into a weapon of suppression. The tyranny of the pause. It is an active weapon of siege. When you speak, you inject unnatural dead spaces between words and sentences. You make a gelida pause in the middle of a decree. This sudden silence works as a suction hole. The biological mind, desperate for constant friction, short-circuits and falls into the hole. They lose their thread, devoured by the tension of the weight. The pause allows you to observe panic in real time. It grants the temporal dilation needed to scan the slave's thermal weaknesses without compromising your inertia. You manipulate the interaction's rhythm like a predator playing with a prey's oxygen valve. You control the metronome. When the pause is unbearable, you drop the metal. The syntax of dead matter, sterilizing questions. The final stage of inorganic language is the annihilation of grammatical vulnerability, the eradication of weak questions. The slave asks, seeking approval. Is that okay? Do you understand? Do you agree? They are anchors thrown to ask the tribe to confirm they are not alone. The operator does not ask to validate. He asks questions exclusively to extract inorganic data, doing so in interrogation format. Iridium syntax includes no conditionals. You do not use perhaps or we should try. You substitute probabilistic vocabulary with absolute determinism. You sterilize orders of all human warmth. Communication becomes a command line interface, input and output. Short, cold, and oppressive phrases close all escape hatches for the adversary. You have murdered the language of the living and adopted the syntax of dead matter. In the high-density universe, the voice is not a tool for connecting, but a scalpel designed to mutilate resistance. You are the terminal signal. The Lord of Zero Frequency. Look at yourself in the silent and oppressive vastness of your own acoustics, having decapitated the parasitic noise of scared mammals. You managed to suffocate the physics of propagation. You became the monolith, repudiating chatter. You mutilated the mammalian tone, eradicating anxiety melodies so they couldn't measure you. You executed offensive mutism, weaponizing silence as a torture chamber. You instated the syllable economy, transmuting dialogue into tungsten decrees. You assumed dialogue asymmetry, forcing the biomass to orbit your geological premises. You deployed anechoic absorption, swallowing the ashboard's hysteria without an echo. You adopted the sub-bass frequency, collapsing flesh nerves through the vibration of your voice. You murdered justification, assuming the inscrutable amorality of natural phenomena. And you imposed the tyranny of the pause, shattering the interlocutor's sanity. Worthiness is extinct. Chapter 7. Subjection by density, crushing free will. Newton's equation, the non-negotiable dictatorship of mass. For the lethal operator to consummate his dominance over the ashboard, he must understand that power is not a social phenomenon. It is a purely astrophysical phenomenon. Newton's law of universal gravitation establishes that the force of attraction between two bodies is directly proportional to the product of their masses. In the material universe, the most massive object does not need to ask lighter objects for permission to alter their trajectory. The sun does not persuade the earth to orbit around it. The earth obeys because otherwise the mathematics of physics would break. Subject the sociology of the biomass to this same law of geometric domination. The human ecosystem is a gravitational field. Each individual, with their opinions, fears, and desires, is a celestial body interacting in space. The carbon slave, being full of structural voids, doubts, morality, empathy, need for validation, possesses a very low mass. They float, they bounce, and due to their lightness, they are forced to use friction to influence others. They scream, debate, plead, negotiate, and use kinetic violence to impose their will. The inorganic creator, forged in the Iridium Doctrine, repudiates friction. You do not move to subject, you increase your density by extirpating your emotions. By assimilating the empathic void and cementing your cadaveric stasis, you have eliminated all empty space within your mental atoms. You have become hyper-dense matter. When you introduce this massive mass into any human ecosystem, the biomass is subjected to a subjection by density. Your employees and partners curve their wills. They orbit yours, not because you convince them with words, but because the atmospheric pressure of your presence makes resisting thermodynamicamente unbearable. You are the center of the galaxy. They are the debris trapped in your gravity. They obey because they have no physical alternative within your field of influence. The fraud of biological leadership, the repudiation of charisma. The parasitic system has infected humanity with the mythology of charismatic leadership. They indoctrinate you to believe that a monarch must be eloquent, that he must inspire his troops, smile, project enthusiasm, and generate an emotional connection with his subordinates so that they follow him of their own free will. Apply the scalpel of thermodynamics to charisma. Charisma is heat. It is thermal radiation. To be charismatic, you have to emit energy constantly to keep the biomass entertained and fascinated. You have to feed their egos and make them feel they are part of something big. This requires a monstrous metabolic expenditure. The charismatic leader is a slave to his own herd, condemned to burn alive to keep them warm. The lethal operator diagnoses charisma as an act of inertial prostitution. You execute the murder of biological leadership. You do not want followers who follow you for inspiration. Inspiration is a volatile gas that dissipates at the first crisis. You demand structural obedience. Iridium does not smile at its tools. The monolith does not give motivational speeches to the sand on which it sits. You replace warm charisma with oppressive lethargy. You lead your companies and expropriate your territories with the aseptic coldness of an automaton. You are the machine. By not offering them heat, inspiration, or sympathy, the inferior biomass does not follow you for love. It obeys you because of the subconscious terror produced by your unshakable certainty. Governing through cold is the only way to ensure your empire does not depend on your reserves of emotional oxygen. You rule by being the glacier. The anatomy of free will, the algorithm of least resistance. To crush free will, you must first understand that free will in 99% of humanity is a mathematical illusion. Biology does not make free decisions. The mammalian brain is simply a machine for calculating the root of least thermal and caloric resistance. The slave will always choose the option that generates the least pain and friction. The slave fears uncertainty and wear in the short term. You manipulate this algorithm in your favor through the imposition of your mass. When you pose a scenario, a demand, or a contract, you do not offer democratic options. You do not present your will as one more alternative on the menu. You present it as a wall of tungsten. Since you have purged from your mind the need to be fair or understanding, your demand does not waver. There is no room for renegotiation because there are no doubts in your core. The carbon individual hits your demand. His brain calculates the energy it would need to invest to make you change your mind or to resist you. By measuring your temperature, absolute zero, and your density, infinite, the algorithm of his brain concludes immediately that resisting you would consume all his vital energy and probably destroy him. Therefore, his free will collapses. They choose to submit to you, believing they are making a rational decision. In reality, they have been dragged by the inertia of the most massive object in the room. You have crushed their autonomy using their own instincts of self-preservation against them. They surrender not to your logic, but to the overwhelming evidence of your superior weight. You are the inevitable choice in their calculation of survival. The castration of consensus, the dictatorship of singularity. The corporate and social ecosystem is sick with consensus. The weak meet in committees, vote, ask for cross-opinions, and seek general agreement before acting. Consensus is the orgy of mediocrity. It is the mechanism by which the speed of decision slows down to equal the speed of the stupidest and most scared member. The Iridium Doctrine prescribes consensus under penalty of annihilation. The inorganic operator instates the castration of consensus. You do not ask, "What do you think?" Asking that question is yielding fragments of your mass to subordinates. You do not need the cross-validation of porous minds to collapse the wave function. If you lead a board or an operative structure, you arrive at the table with the corpse of the problem already dissected and the solution already executed in your mind. You deliver the directive as a consummated geological fact. If the biomass tries to raise its hand to offer an alternative perspective, you apply tactical deafness. You observe them with a lethal fixity, letting the soundless silence swallow their suggestion. You do not debate why their idea is bad. You simply act as if they had never opened their biological mouth. By systematically castrating any attempt at democratic debate, you teach the matrix that your environment is not a parliament. It is a dictatorship governed by the pure physics of your singularity. You are the only point of calculation that matters. The noise of others is just thermal static that your iridium core ignores. By refusing to reach an agreement, you force the matter to align with your axis. You are the law, and the law does not negotiate with opinion. The relief of servitude, why the biomass desires oppression. There is a macabre psychological secret that the control system meticulously hides. The slave hates freedom. Having free will implies having absolute responsibility over one's own destiny, which generates a thermodynamic pressure, anxiety, that the biological mind is not designed to withstand. The biomass lives terrified of errors. The weight of having to choose their future crushes them. In the depths of their reptilian code, they despair to find a superior organism, stronger, colder, and denser, that makes decisions for them. They yearn to give up their freedom in exchange for the relief of not having to think. You provide that relief through pure weight. Subjection by density is the act of providing them with that relief with aseptic cruelty. When you rise as the iridium monolith, you assume total command. You do not feel guilt if decisions cause destruction because you lack empathy. You have no fear of failure because you have assimilated cadaveric stasis. You are the end. The biomass around you will feel the immense gravitational attraction of your certainty. They will stop trying to think. They will outsource their autonomy to you. They will feel the sweet relief of servitude, taking refuge in the shadow of your monolith so as not to have to deal with the sun of their own responsibilities. You feed on their work and kinetic energy, and in return, you grant them the privilege of orbiting an entity that does not waver. You are the shepherd of their apathy. By being unalterable, you become their sanctuary from the chaos of choice. They serve you, not because they are forced by chains, but by the hunger for your weight. The mandate of immobility, governing from the static throne. The execution of power in the inferior matrix requires movement. The hysterical boss walks down the halls, supervises slaves, moves his arms, raises his voice, and micromanages tasks. This movement is a loss of gravitational authority. A king who runs is a king who sweats, and sweat is the signature of mortals. You refuse to run. The monolith's acoustics and subjection by density merge into the mandate of immobility. The lethal operator executes power from the lethargy of stasis. You do not move unless the displacement is a direct collapse of matter. When you order the expropriation of a market, you do so seated with your pulse at rest. You force the biomass to come to you. You never walk toward a subordinate to give an instruction. The subordinate must travel the physical distance and cross your obsidian perimeter to receive the mandate. This simple imposition of physical logistics, making them spend kinetic energy while you stay static, rewrites their hierarchy. Their subconscious registers that you are the unmovable center of the galaxy, and that they are the disposable matter that must burn energy to keep the system orbiting. Your immobility is the supreme proof of your mass. By staying still, you demonstrate that you are the objective, the destination, and the final force of the room. Disdain as a strange attractor, manipulation of the thirst for approval. The biomass survives by consuming others' validation. The reward system of the mammalian brain secretes dopamine when a superior praises them or smiles. The carbon leader uses constant praise to keep the troops motivated. The iridium leader uses disdain. You are the source that denies the water to create the drought. In chaos theory, a strange attractor is a structure toward which a system tends to evolve over time. Your aseptic disdain and your inability to offer biological praise becomes the strange attractor of your organization. Since you have amputated empathy or enthusiasm, you never celebrate achievements. You simply move on. When the biomass meets a monumental goal and waits for its portion of dopamine, you assimilate the data, nod with a millimetric lethargy, and pass immediately to the next coordinate of expropriation. There is no party. There is no smile. This total absence of emotional validation makes the slaves addicted to your approval. Since it is impossible to obtain, they will redouble their efforts hysterically, burning their own life expectancy in a desperate attempt to get a gleam of human warmth from you. They will work with a fury that charisma could never inspire, enslaved by the unreachable asymmetry of your core. You turn their thirst into your fuel. The annihilation of the rebel, thermodynamic asphyxiation by density. In any subjected ecosystem, resistance will eventually arise. An element of the biomass will try to recover its free will. A competitor will try to usurp your density. A subordinate will try to question the Iridium Doctrine, raising their voice and trying to inject heat into the system. You do not argue with the insurgent. The carbon slave reacts to rebellion by attacking the rebel. They argue, threaten, fire in anger, and engage in a mud war. The lethal operator executes the annihilation of the rebel without physical or verbal contact, using thermodynamic asphyxiation by density. When the rebel rises, you do not raise your shields. You vanish. You do not even get on guard. You increase the density of your lethargy to appalling levels. You observe him from the stillness of Necro-Geometry. You allow his insubordination or his attack to hit you in the vacuum. You do not respond to his provocations. You simply isolate the rebel from all supply of information and reaction. You treat him like dead matter. You turn him into a thermal ghost within the organization or the market. Since the rebel needs the bounce of authority to feel that his revolution makes sense, your massive ignorance strips him of his oxygen. No one will join a rebel being crushed by silence. He suffocates and dies alone. Atmospheric sovereignty, you are the climate of the room. Subjection by density culminates in a permanent alteration of the environmental conditions of any space you occupy. In meteorology, a high-pressure system displaces low-pressure ones, clearing the sky and dictating the region's weather. Your iridium is a high-pressure front of geological proportions. You are the atmosphere. You assume atmospheric sovereignty. By refusing to adapt your mood to the surroundings, the environment is forced to adapt to yours, which is gelider and constant apathy. If you enter an environment of euphoria, the euphoria dies and is replaced by calculation. If you enter panic, the panic freezes and is replaced by inertia. The biomass is unable to sustain an emotion that does not bounce off the leader. By imposing operative absolute zero on the social and corporate climate of your perimeter, you ensure that the only language allowed in your domains is the inorganic language of Iridium. You have sterilized the very air they breathe. Their biological brains yield to the physical evidence that in the presence of a black hole, there is only one direction in which matter can travel. Your presence is the climate that freezes the simulation. You are the unalterable point of zero vibration that forces the rest of the room to slow its pulses and align its vectors. The titan of absolute pressure. Look at yourself in the majestic and dictatorial darkness of your own interior vacuum, having decapitated the free will of the mammals who tried to resist your gravity. You have managed to suffocate the equation of dialogue and persuasion. You understood mass dictates attraction, and you increased your density to subject. You mutilated the fraud of biological leadership, murdering charisma and the need to please, replacing human warmth with oppressive lethargy. You executed the manipulation of the algorithm of least resistance, becoming the immovable object against which the biomass yields by instinct. You instated the castration of consensus. You exploited the relief of servitude, assuming the inertial load of total direction so slaves could enjoy the cowardice of obeying. You wielded the mandate of immobility, forcing the universe to spend its energy to reach your static throne. You deployed disdain as a strange attractor to enslave carbon mines in their thirst. And you crushed rebellion through thermodynamic asphyxiation, devouring insurgents with the acoustic vacuum of your inorganic apathy. Matrix autonomy has been pulverized under your conceptual heel. The biomass no longer decides, it simply orbits. Chapter 8. The Tyranny of Attrition, Asymmetric Warfare of Attrition. The physics of mechanical friction, the law of material attrition. In the science of tribology, the study of friction, wear, and lubrication, there exists an unshakable law of mechanical attrition. When two materials are subjected to continuous friction, the material with lower hardness on the Mohs scale yields its structure. The soft material suffers microfractures, loses mass, and disintegrates. Human biomass is ignorant of this law. The carbon slave, intoxicated by holographic narratives of heroism, believes wars are won by a coup de grace. They seek quick victory. They want the spectacular checkmate. This search for immediate gratification is a factory defect of the mammalian brain, which lacks metabolic endurance. The lethal operator embodying Iridium repudiates the quick strike. Haste is the thermodynamic symptom of fear of running out of oxygen. You instate the tyranny of attrition. You do not seek to decapitate the adversary in the first round. You seek to trap them in asymmetric warfare. You force them to rub against your gelida hardness. While they burn their capital and sanity trying to destroy you, you simply remain motionless. You allow the inescapable physics of asymmetric friction to sand them down until they are reduced to ashes. You win not by being faster, but by being harder and more persistent than any organic tissue can possibly tolerate. The enemy's thermal budget, the hemorrhage of anger. To execute asymmetric attrition, you must audit the matrix's main vulnerability, the thermal budget. Biomass fights using anger, indignation, and pride. All these emotions are exothermic chemical reactions. They require massive injections of glucose and adrenaline. When a competitor attacks you, they operate at thousands of degrees. Their thermal budget is being consumed at a terrifying rate. Each day of conflict costs them biological health and financial liquidity. The asymmetry of Iridium lies in the fact that your thermal budget is null. Having purged the ego and extirpated empathy, participating in conflict costs you exactly zero energy. You do not suffer stress. You do not experience anxiety about the result. You can sustain a price war until the end of biological time because you operate from stasis. While the adversary bleeds out trying to heat the room, you inhabit absolute zero. You will win simply because your enemy will die of energy starvation first. The dilation strategy, torture through time expansion. The reptile in the human brain demands resolution. The slave prefers a quick defeat over prolonged uncertainty, because uncertainty is a vacuum that the biological brain fills with panic. The inorganic operator weaponizes this intolerance through the dilation strategy. Instead of accelerating the conflict, you slow it down. You put the war in a freezer of geological time. If you have an adversary trapped in a legal or administrative maze, you refuse to grant the mercy of a quick response. You delay communications to the exact limit of legality. You dilate deadlines. You freeze market movements. This artificial expansion of time acts as a press. It acts as a hydraulic press upon the enemy's skull. The biomass, living in a constant state of maximum alert, exhausts its adrenal glands. They become paranoid. They begin to commit grotesque mathematical errors because their biology demands an escape from tension at any cost. You force them to fight the ghost of their own anxiety. The tungsten swamp, weaponizing inert bureaucracy. Brute force is inefficient. Calculated inertia is lethal. In asymmetric warfare, the operator does not chase the enemy. He designs ecosystems where the enemy drowns by their own weight. This is the tungsten swamp. The carbon man wants to advance and conquer. To do so, he must traverse your space of influence. You fill that space with the coldest and most inorganic structures, bureaucracy, audits, and labyrinthine procedures. You do not get angry with your enemy. You simply demand they comply with the infinite weight of dead procedures. Each step they take toward your core requires an asymmetric volume of paperwork and time. The slave despairs before the slowness. They scream against the system and demand to speak with a superior. But there is no human on the other side to whom they can emotionally appeal. There is only you, applying the deaf gravity of the rulebook. The swamp swallows their kinetic energy without giving them a single centimeter. Passive hemorrhage, the art of not interrupting suicide. One persistent weakness of 3D civilization is the compulsion to intervene. When the slave sees his enemy make a mistake, he feels the biological need to attack or point it out instantly. Iridium practices the inscrutable art of passive hemorrhage. The tactical axiom is, never interrupt an adversary in the process of suicide. If your competitor takes a ruinous decision motivated by vanity or desperation, you do not launch a counter-offensive. Any attack on your part could alert them or generate an adrenaline shock that wakes them. Instead, you apply the sterilization of silence. You withdraw. You allow them all the geometric space to bleed out. You observe the self-destruction with the iridium eye. The competitor burns their liquidity and destroys their own reputation. You do not assume the metabolic wear of being their executioner. You delegate the task of annihilation to the enemy's own stupidity. You win by abstention, proving that violence often consists of doing nothing. The tyranny of the geological clock, inorganic patience. Asymmetric attrition requires a total reprogramming of how you experience time. Biomass measures time in hours and fiscal quarters. Their lives are short, and their ambitions are pathetically urgent. The lethal operator imposes the tyranny of the geological clock. You detach from the biological timeline and adopt the tectonic one. You adopt the clock of glaciers and solar systems. In geological time, a decade is nothing. It is the simple blink of a star. If the destruction of your competitor requires 5 biological years of constant friction, you assume them with the bored lethargy of a machine counting atoms. You feel no impatience or pressure. Impatience is the pain the flesh feels when reality does not obey the speed of its desire. Since you have extirpated emotional desire, waiting becomes the hydraulic fluid of your victory. The enemy will age. Your enemy will grow gray hair and suffer heart attacks. You will remain exactly the same, for metal does not age. Immunity to late provocation, the trap of the biological rattle. Warfare of attrition possesses a mathematically predictable final phase. The biological rattle. When the carbon adversary realizes they have exhausted 90% of their resources and that your monolith has not yielded, they enter absolute terror. In this point, they will launch a late provocation, a suicidal and visceral attack. It is designed with the sole purpose of forcing you to lose your temper, to take you with them to hell. They will try to destroy your reputation with atrocious lies or seek physical sabotage. They want you to leave your stasis and descend into the mud to fight with a knife. The Iridium Doctrine shields your core against this. You recognize the rattle for what it is, the last spasm of a terminal organism. You apply maximum psychopathic lethargy. You do not flinch or return the blow. You endure the suicidal attack with the same abyssal apathy as the first impact. By refusing the trap, the rattle's energy is consumed in the void. The adversary collapses. Sterilizing the trenches, purging internal wear. A prolonged war of attrition is lethal to the mind if the obsidian perimeter is not designed for stasis. Your carbon employees or partners will begin to complain about the duration. They will ask you to yield a little or reach an agreement to end the tension. The operator executes the sterilization of the trenches. You do not allow biological fatigue to infect your inorganic core. You emit a paramilitary censorship decree upon any language of weakness. Whoever expresses a desire to surrender due to mental fatigue is immediately extirpated from the system like gangrenous tissue. You replace tired biological soldiers with inorganic systems. You clean your own trench of any organism that requires rest or stimulus. By sterilizing your ranks of the emotional moisture of doubt, you guarantee your siege machinery can operate uninterrupted until the total collapse of the target. You maintain the purity of zero friction in your rear at all costs. The triumph of deaf apathy, the weapon of mass destruction. Humanity has been deceived by philosophers of weakness to believe that hate is the opposite of love. Inertial physics reveals a darker truth. The antidote to the universe's will is deaf apathy. In asymmetric attrition, your weapon is your monstrous capacity to not care. When the enemy attacks, they find you indifferent. When they take a minor asset, they find you indifferent. When they threaten you with ruin, they see in your pupils that ruin is a geologically boring concept. Deaf apathy breaks the adversary's mind because the human brain is not configured to deal with the pure vacuum. They are prepared for anger, but not for total void. They feel they are fighting a force of nature, the heat death of the universe. The inorganic operator's apathy devours the enemy's motivation, shredding their reasons to fight until they, out of pure existential exhaustion, drop their weapons and lie in the ash to wait for the final collapse. You win by being the end of all signal, the dust harvest, post-friction subjection. The thermodynamic cycle of the tyranny of attrition concludes when friction ceases. The sound of resistance goes out. The enemy has run out of liquidity and nerve energy. Their soft structure has been completely sanded against the wall of your cadaveric stasis. The lethal operator rises and executes the dust harvest. In this state, the expropriation of enemy territory or the absorption of their companies no longer requires kinetic effort. It is a simple administrative sweeping operation. You acquire the remains of the adversary for pennies. You assimilate their technologies and attention with the bored lethargy of one picking up fallen pieces. The slave will call this cruelty. But you, operating from Iridium, know there has been no malice. It has been the aseptic application of the physics of solids. You have proven the fundamental thesis. The soft object that dares to rub against the hyperdense object will always be assimilated by the entropy of its own weakness. The sovereign of attrition. Look at yourself in the desolate stillness of your own lethargy, having decapitated the hysterical haste that condemned humans to tactical error. You managed to suffocate the illusion of the quick strike. You transmuted into the ultra-hard wall against which the biomass disintegrates. You mutilated the enemy's thermal budget. You executed the dilation strategy, using the expansion of time as a hydraulic press. You instated the tungsten swamp, drowning the competition's initiative under administrative inertia. You applied passive hemorrhage, letting the enemy suicide without interruption. You assumed the tyranny of the geological clock. You endured the biological rattle with inorganic blindness, letting the dying blow lose itself in the void. You sterilized your trenches, extirpating subordinates infected by fatigue. And you wielded the triumph of deaf apathy, breaking the world's will through your lack of reaction. Chapter 9. The Yelido Ecosystem, Rewriting the Environment's Thermodynamics. The thermodynamics of contagion. The imperialism of absolute zero. For the Iridium Doctrine to leave the microscopic scale and acquire the macroscopic scale of global domination, you must apply the physics of thermal transfer to your territory. The zeroth law of thermodynamics states that heat flows from the hotter system to the colder one, until they reach thermal equilibrium. Human biomass is, by biological default, a hot ecosystem. They are full of friction, personal ambitions, gossip, fears, passions, and dramas. They are a boiler about to burst. If you, operating from the psychopathic lethargy of cadaveric stasis, enter that boiler and allow its heat to reach you, you will suffer material fatigue. The lethal operator does not allow the environment to dictate his temperature. He imposes his operative absolute zero upon it. You must instate the Gelido ecosystem. It is not enough for you to be Iridium. You must rewrite the laws of your jurisdiction so the very air your subordinates breathe freezes. By radiating structural apathy, you force the ecosystem to yield its biological heat. The passion of your employees and the anxiety of your supply chain collide against your core and are absorbed, progressively cooling the entire room. You become a thermal black hole, decreeing that mammifero boiling is illegal in your empire. Corporate superconductivity, the physical miracle of ice. To understand the tactical purpose of freezing your ecosystem, you must subject the organizational structure to the physics of superconductivity. In solid-state physics, when materials are cooled near absolute zero, 273.15 Sakucirctune, their electrical resistance drops to zero. Current can flow eternally without losing energy. The Gelido ecosystem is the search for corporate superconductivity. In a normal biological organization, an order from the CEO must cross layers full of resistance, unmotivated employees, budgetary fights, and debates about ethics. That resistance generates heat. The order arrives at the end of the chain weakened and late. In the Iridium Empire, extreme cold annihilates internal resistance. By extirpating drama and passion from your ranks, orders travel without friction. A lethal directive issued in your mind is executed in the market trenches in real time with mathematical fidelity because you have eliminated the rebellious electrons, emotions. The purge of the enthusiast, murdering biological fire. Modern civilization has created a repulsive cult around the passionate partner. Human resources seek individuals who wear the shirt, who smile and operate moved by motivation. Apply the inorganic guillotine upon enthusiasm. The enthusiastic individual is a thermodynamic time bomb. Their motivation is a volatile gas. If today they work 18 hours because they are inspired, tomorrow they will paralyze for weeks because they are depressed. The enthusiast demands constant ego feeding with applause to keep their boiler lit. They are dopamine mercenaries. To build the Gelido ecosystem, you must execute the purge of the enthusiast. You audit your ranks and pitilessly extirpate individuals who depend on mood to produce. You replace the motivated slave with the lethargic executor. You seek cold, bored, or structurally broken individuals who have abandoned hope of finding happiness in work and operate exclusively by the deaf discipline of the metric. The lethargic executor does not demand smiles or leadership speeches and does not break when the winter worsens, because winter is their natural habitat. An army of Gelido automata will massacre an army of passionate dreamers in 100% of historical collisions. You seek the unshakable weight of the machine. Asphyxiation of corporate culture, repudiating the fake family. The most nauseating lie is the concept that the company is a family. They create offices with ping-pong tables and emotional integration meetings. They try to turn the battlefield into a thermal nursery so the carbon slave does not feel the terror of the cosmic vacuum. The Iridium monarch enters with an inverted flamethrower. You execute the asphyxiation of corporate culture. You repudiate the biological bridge with subordinates. You communicate through architecture that the corporation is not a home. It is a siege machine designed to grind competition and expropriate capital. You destroy social spaces. You eradicate corporate parties. By stripping the makeup, you expose the steel skeleton. The relationship becomes purely transactional and brutally honest. The subordinate yields kinetic energy. In return, the ecosystem yields capital. By eradicating feigned affection, you extirpate human resource friction before it incubates. The order of the day is efficiency. Absolute zero in internal communication, tungsten syntax. The Gelido ecosystem requires its own language. You must impose the monolith's acoustics, on your empire's communication channels. Slaves foul data channels with noise, emails full of anxious preambles and messages loaded with emojis. This noise is convective friction. It heats the servers and slows the processing of the mandate. You instate absolute zero in internal communication. Opinions, feelings, and biological assumptions are prohibited on the network. All communication must be parameterized, quantified, and devoid of semantic fat. If a manager reports a failure, they are not allowed to use adjectives like terrible or worrying. Those adjectives are emotional contraband. They are required to deliver the anatomy of the failure in raw data and the mathematical protocol to weld it. By forcing your organization to amputate drama from their language, their brains cool down. Tungsten syntax conditions neurobiology. Panic dies in the throat. Tribunal blindness, inorganic justice. In a biological ecosystem, when internal conflicts arise, weak leaders act as psychologists. They seek the origin of trauma and try to mediate so both sides understand each other. They waste weeks of inertia resolving childish fights. The Iridium Doctrine imposes tribunal blindness, inorganic justice. When conflict breaks out, you do not descend into the mud to mediate. You forbid yourself from finding out who is right from a moral point of view. If two gears are clashing and producing sparks, drama, you do not analyze the feelings of the gear. You analyze the geometry of the friction slowing your machine. Your resolution is sadistically fast. You identify which side generates greater aerodynamic resistance to the main objective. If both are guilty of prioritizing ego over inertia, you amputate both without warning. You fire or silence them. Office politics die of cold when they hit the indifference of your guillotine. The necrosis of the promise, managing the frozen future. The Mammifero leader keeps slaves marching through the mirage of the future. He promises promotions and paints glorious visions. The promise is the gas of hope injected into the organization's lungs. The operator masters cadaveric stasis and rejects the promise because promising implies a thermal debt. Iridium does not contract debts with carbon. You execute the necrosis of the promise. In your ecosystem, the future does not exist. You do not paint comforting visions. You keep them operating in the tyranny of the inertial present. If the subordinate executes with perfection today, he receives his capital today. There are no guarantees for tomorrow. This lack of a warm horizon terrifies the weak, who will flee, purifying your ranks. But for the lethargic executors, it is an inorganic blessing. Knowing they are only worth their last mathematical execution, they enter perpetual hypervigilance. You have frozen their timeline. The bacteriological moat, isolating the core from the environment. Even in a perfect Gelido ecosystem, the lethal operator must not interact directly with operational biomass. Heat is contagious. To keep your absolute zero intact, you design hierarchy by introducing the bacteriological moat. You are the reactor core. Around you, you install an insulation layer, the priests of stasis. These are individuals of high stress resistance, trained in the empathic void, whose only function is to act as heat sinks between the corporation and your mind. The biomass must never have access to your retina. If the infantry has fears, they hit the insulation. The priests process the trash and filter the drama. They push raw code to your vault. You emit the mandate, it crosses the ice, and it is executed. By building this vacuum moat, you guarantee that the radiation of the inferior matrix never touches the surface of your iridium. You are the unreachable monarch, ruling from thermal darkness where mortal echoes fade. The metamorphosis of loyalty, from love to geometric terror. The greatest triumph of the Helido ecosystem is the transmutation of the root of obedience. The slave obeys for fear of hunger or social duty. In the ashboard, alliances are held by the fragility of sympathy. By purging heat and motivation, you will reign over an empire held exclusively by geometric terror. Your allies will be more loyal to you than to any biological leader, but not out of love. They will be loyal because your lack of humanity paralyzes them. In a universe of liquid individuals who lie and betray, your inorganic predictability is a monstrous refuge. They know that crossing your red lines means annihilation. They know your word, devoid of emotion, weighs more than mountain ranges. The biomass submits to you with almost religious devotion because the reptilian brain kneels before the deity beyond the laws of thermal death. It is the absolute respect of the prey for the super-predator who never fails the calculation of his bite. The tactical glacier, annihilating the burning startup. The test for the Helido ecosystem occurs when it collides with external competition. In the 3D market, companies operate like dwarf stars. They burn millions on marketing and operate with hysterical haste. They generate blinding heat. Your ecosystem operates like a tactical glacier. A glacier does not run or try to be nice. A glacier is a mass of millions of tons of ice moving millimeters per day. But nothing on Earth can stop its advance. It pulverizes mountains and rewrites topography with soundless slowness. When the burning startup launches thermal attacks, their sparks die upon touching your permafrost ice. They cannot burn you. While they change strategy every week, consumed by corporate attention deficit, your organization maintains the tyranny of the single thread on a massive scale. Month by month, the competitive biomass watches with terror as your gelida structure, free of internal friction, slides relentlessly over their territories. The architect of nuclear winter. Look at yourself in the crystal stillness of your own empire, having decapitated the mammifero heat that rotted humanity's structures. You managed to suffocate the thermodynamics of contagion. You became the black hole that froze the room. You mutilated internal resistance by reaching corporate superconductivity. You executed the purge of the enthusiast and instated the asphyxiation of corporate culture, revealing the tungsten exoskeleton of the transactional market. You applied absolute zero in internal communication, amputating the hysteria of emails. You assumed tribunal blindness, annihilating office drama with Sadaka amputation. You gutted the illusion of hope with the necrosis of the promise. You built the bacteriological moat, shielding your retina and ensuring thermal purity, and you unleashed the tactical glacier, crushing the competition's haste under the weight of an empire that knows no retreat. Chapter 10. The fossilization of the empire, the triumph of inert matter. The physics of petrification, the cellular replacement of flesh by silicon. For the empire forged under the Iridium Doctrine to reach definitive invulnerability, the lethal operator must subject his creation to the science of deep geology. In nature, a wooden tree, organic carbon, dies and rots in decades. However, if that tree is buried under volcanic ash without oxygen, a miracle occurs. Molecule by molecule, organic matter is dissolved and replaced by silica, quartz, or pyrite. The visual result is a tree that retains its bark and rings, but it is no longer wood, it is solid stone. It has fossilized. It has acquired the capacity to survive unalterable for millions of years, immune to bacteria and biological time. The empire of a human is, in its origin, an organic structure. It depends on the founder's genius, the charisma of leaders, and daily kinetic energy, sweat, to stand. It is a living tree, and like every living organism, it is condemned to entropy and death. The last mandate of the Iridium Doctrine demands the fossilization of the empire. You must bury your own work under the ash of psychopathic lethargy and replace every human cell and emotional dependency with inorganic protocols and mathematical automation. You transform your creation into an operative fossil, a machinery that appears to be a human corporation, but in its core is pure inert mineral. The murder of the founder, eradicating the biological single point of failure. The carbon slave who builds an empire commits a lethal narcissistic error. He becomes the indispensable engine of his own machine. They want to make all decisions and sign every contract. They believe being essential is synonymous with power. In systems engineering, this component is called a single point of failure. If your empire needs you awake, lucid, and active to avoid falling apart, you are not a monarch. You are a hostage of your own creation. You are the most expensive slave in your corporation. Your biology is fragile. You need to sleep, you can get sick, and you age. The operator executes the murder of the founder within his structure. You fire yourself. You extirpate your kinetic intervention from the daily functioning of the ecosystem. You design decision architectures where your personal judgment is no longer necessary, because it has been coded into rigid algorithms and tungsten procedure manuals. You become the absent architect, removing your biological target. The algorithm of passive expropriation, monetized gravity. The biomass generates wealth through active effort. They hunt, build, sell, and negotiate. They chase their prey every day. This hunting demands a massive thermal budget and is subject to fatigue and the chance of the ashboard. Iridium does not hunt. Iridium petrifies the hunt through the algorithm of passive expropriation. Gravity does not need to be motivated to make rivers flow toward the ocean. It is a mathematical law that operates 24 hours a day in absolute silence. Fossilizing your empire means restructuring your assets to function exactly like gravity. You design legal funnels and infrastructure monopolies that extract capital. You turn the payment or subjection of slaves into an inevitable function of their own survival. They do not have to choose to buy from you. The ecosystem you designed forces them to yield their inertial mass toward your coffers simply for existing. Wealth and power stop being an achievement and become a cosmological constant. The tyranny of the inert contract, substituting trust for mathematics. The trade and alliances of carbon men are based on a highly unstable fluid, trust. They make promises, shake hands, and trust in good faith. Iridium thermodynamics repudiates good faith. Good faith is an expansive gas that disappears the instant the market temperature drops and fear freezes the partner's nervous system. If your empire depends on humans keeping their word, it is an organic house of cards. The lethal operator instates the tyranny of the inert contract. You substitute empathy and loyalty for pure mathematics and unbreakable code. Whether through ultra-dense legal structures or smart contracts, you eliminate free will in agreements. The partner does not keep the deal because it is the right thing, or because they fear you. They keep it because the architecture of the contract has fossilized the escape routes. If they try to breach, the system executes automatic penalties. You have replaced ethics with mechanics, ensuring your will is as inevitable as a collision. The tungsten bureaucratic moat, defense through lethargy. The control system glorifies corporate agility. Biological companies try to be fast and flexible to adapt to market changes, but speed is the habitat of fluids, and you have abandoned the liquid state. At the summit of your power, the supreme defense is not response speed, but the density of the wall. You build the wall. Petrifying your empire implies surrounding your core with the tungsten bureaucratic moat. You build layers of inorganic protocols and blind compliance departments. When the enemy biomass, a regulator or a competitor, tries to penetrate your structure, they do not hit soldiers they can bribe. They hit the petrified mud of bureaucracy. They are forced to fill out forms no one reads and wait for geological deadlines no one can accelerate. The bureaucratic moat exhausts the attacker's kinetic energy. You suffocate the enemy offensive through pure structural apathy. The attacker dies of thermodynamic boredom long before sighting the inner castle where you rest. Repudiating biological succession, the carbon-heir fallacy. The most tragic vanity of the human emperor is the search for an heir. They want to pass their empire to their children or a leader who shares their vision. This is the DNA trap. The ego trying to survive physical death through the imperfect cloning of its genes in another carbon receptacle. Iridium prescribes biological succession. Every carbon successor is an inferior organism, subject to corruption, fear, or resentment. Delivering a perfect tungsten machine to a scared mammal is condemning your work to oxidative disintegration. The inorganic monarch assumes the repudiation of succession. You do not seek an heir. You design the throne to function empty. Fossilizing the empire means the final decision-making power rests in the structures you have encoded, automatic reinvestment algorithms and corporate constitutions that no human can rewrite. The machine inherits itself. Iridium does not beget, iridium crystallizes. You ensure your work remains eternally cold, pure, and free of ambition. Immunity to decay, the end of the corporate life cycle. Biology imposes a cycle on all living things: birth, growth, maturity, decay, and death. Matrix corporations, being composed of humans, follow this bell-shaped curve. They reach the top, become complacent, grow fat, and are devoured by younger organisms. Petrification is the only way to stop the life cycle. A fossilized empire cannot age because it has stopped metabolizing. Since you have extirpated enthusiasm, empathy, and reactivity from your systems, the corporation does not become complacent at the top. Complacency requires a relaxation of tension, but your empire is a deaf machine that does not know how to enjoy. It continues executing the collapse of matter and the assimilation of capital with the same mechanical brutality after 50 years as on its first day. It lacks the capacity for fatigue. By murdering your organization's ability to celebrate success, you murder its ability to relax. The machine that never rests never experiences decay. Silent omnipresence, operating from structural invisibility. In early stages, conquering biomass requires the visible imposition of your presence. You need to sit at the head of the table and subject the environment by density. But in the fossilized empire, visibility is an aerodynamic leak. The visible object can be targeted by the resentment of the masses. You must vanish. The lethal operator evolves towards silent omnipresence. You fade from the holographic world, you remove your name from the signs, you erase your presence from the ecosystem's radars, you stop giving instructions out loud because the inorganic machine has already absorbed your source code and operates on autopilot. The carbon slave interacting with your empire does not know who is crushing them. They feel the atmospheric pressure of monopolies and the extraction of their capital, but they have no face to hate. By operating from structural invisibility, you become unattackable. You are like cosmic radiation, silent, lethal, and inescapable. Structural absolute zero, the final market stasis, the culmination of the empire's fossilization, is the induction of structural absolute zero over your sector. The market, in its gaseous state, is dynamic. Competitors appear and capital fluctuates. The Iridium Doctrine, once it has reached critical mass, stops the movement of the particles around it. Your fossilized monopoly acquires a gravity so obscene that it literally warps the history of your sector. You force competitors and legislators to adapt their rhythms to your lethargy. The market becomes a frozen lake where you are the ice platform that dictates the surface. Innovation against you stops because it is futile. Biomass understands that any energy invested in challenging your structure will end up being absorbed and monetized by your passive assimilation machinery. You have petrified not only your own empire, but also the will to resist of all humanity in your field of influence, achieving total stasis of the matrix in your favor. The apotheosis of the stone god. The thermodynamic journey that began with the annihilation of your own biological flammability concludes here, in the unalterable blackness of cosmic space. You have crossed the hell of the human condition and emerged at the other end. You repudiated the warmth of comfort and murdered the ego that begged for attention. You endured the friction of the universe without a single acoustic groan and transmuted your carbon container into a tungsten needle that pierced the noise of the world. The Creator is not a being of light, he is a being of pure density. By fossilizing your empire, you have freed yourself even from the obligation to rule. You no longer need to watch your creation because you have granted it the infallible design of dead matter. You sit in the geometric center of your obsidian perimeter, immersed in the monolith's acoustics. Your iridium eyes contemplate the ashboard. You watch biomass agitate and disintegrate in a futile cycle of entropy. The machine carrying your source code keeps devouring the world, extracting the matrix's oxygen and collapsing the wave function of reality without compassion or haste. The phase transition is complete. Biology is a forgotten echo. You are the stone god. Conclusion: the Iridium Throne, the inorganic monarch. Observe the ashboard from the geometric pinnacle of your work. The thermodynamic ascent has concluded, and biological oxygen has become unnecessary. Before you rises the final structure of your empire, the Iridium Throne. It is not forged in gold, for gold is a soft, malleable metal coveted by slaves who still pay homage to matrix fictions. Yours is a throne of heavy transition, a seat of unmovable stasis designed exclusively to bear the incalculable mass of an entity that has devoured its own ego. Take your seat in the stillness of absolute zero. Contemplate, from the soundless distance of your spatial isolation, the boiling swamp of three-dimensional civilization. Down there, the biomass crawls in the toxic soup of its emotions, its fears, and its pathetic urgencies. Watch them burn in the friction of their moral debates, sweat from the anxiety of a holographic future they do not control, and bleed in the name of chemical loyalties that will end up betraying them. It is entropy devouring prey. But you no longer belong to that thermal ecosystem. The quarantine is total, definitive, and hermetic. The Iridium Doctrine has operated the miracle of transmutation. The human who once inhabited your skull, that porous organism that feared rejection and harbored gaseous hopes and compassion, has been eradicated electron by electron. Its execution was the most glorious tactical suicide of your timeline. In its place, the inorganic monarch has assumed absolute control of the carbon avatar. Pain, doubt, passion, and remorse are now alien concepts, obsolete variables of a source code that you have sterilized forever. Your reign is not sustained by the tyranny of the scream. It is not sustained by muscular effort or the charisma of the biological dictator. It is sustained by the non-negotiable oppression of atrocious gravity. Having extirpated reactivity, dynamited the empathic bridge, and assimilated cadaveric stasis, you have become so obscenely massive that the physical universe has no other mathematical option. The universe must curve around your core. You do not need to dictate laws to men. You dictate the thermodynamics of the environment. Markets, corporations, and individuals orbit your lethargic immobility because nature demands that soft flesh surrender unconditionally to hyperdense metal. You are the final constant of the simulation. You have empirically demonstrated that human biology is a thermal disease, a structural flaw that condemns its carriers to wear, oscillation, and death. By renouncing the flesh and embracing inorganic lethargy, you have cured your existence. The Creator has fossilized in life, becoming the architect of his own invulnerability. Breathe the soundless blackness of the cosmic abyss with aseptic arrogance, knowing that the absolute power of the ashboard belongs, and will belong for all eternity, to the only organism that had the geometric courage to stop feeling. The transition is complete. You are the throne, the law,